Who are you?
I'm no one.
I was raised to do one thing. But I've got nothing to fight for.
Nothing will stand in our way. I will finish what you started.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it. The dark side. A Jedi. They're real.
The Force. It's calling to you. Just let it in.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 23, aka the 23rd episode. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello. If either one of us had seen the movie The Number 23, we might have a witty title for this episode.
I've seen the number 23.
Okay, of course.
Didn't we? You weren't there when we all watched it as a group.
No, I was not there.
It's really bad. And
yeah,
I think
so at least one of us has watched The Number 23, and still nothing from that movie that's worth referencing at this point in time.
It is the cinematic equivalent of in one ear and out the other, because it just does not stick to you. Much like the great movie The Lazarus Effect that I saw this weekend. Woo!
Oh man!
Woo! Woo! All I can say is kiss my ass, Mark Duplass. I can't believe. I mean, that all those people got paid so much, I'm sure, to be in that movie. I mean, I'm sure they filmed it over a weekend, because they never leave. They never leave like a three schoolroom or 3 laboratory hallway.
Yeah, that's always like an idea that someone has, is like that they think is going to be a challenge. Like, it's a challenge for them. Like, how do we make a movie that's interesting where we only film it in the same 2 rooms over and over? And like, yeah, it may be a challenge on their end, but watching it just ends up being really boring. They're like, oh, they're in this room again?
Yeah, I figured out why they made this film, because I went and I looked at IMDb, and it said it had a budget of $3 million and it made 36. Yeah. That's why they made it.
Yep.
Because because they know now you can throw any take some name people and throw them up against the wall, and you're at least gonna what do they call it? 10 times, not triple, 10 times your money, or whatever. Yeah. But that's not why we're here. We got to address that.
We're not here to talk about the number.
We have to address the elephant in the room. Can you believe it? Colin Jost is no longer the head writer of SNL.
Yeah.
And he hasn't been for like a month, and nobody cares.
Yeah.
I can't stand that guy.
I can't stand that guy. It's a machine, right? It's just interchangeable parts that they just plug in whatever writers they need to, and the whole shit keeps sailing forward.
Colin, don't think of this as a demotion. Just think of it as restructuring. I don't know. It's Tracy just thinks that you'll give him a physical setback if you're head writer when he comes on. We don't want we don't want anything bad to happen to Tracy.
Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
Boy, talk about I mean, it was great to see Tracy Morgan back, but that was a total. Did you watch the SNL?
No, I did not.
It was very much a victory lap kind of thing.
I figured.
Which I mean, I love Tracy Morgan. I think he's hilarious, but he didn't. What did he do? He kind of showed that he's there and aware, and that's great.
His synapses are firing.
Yeah, he did, but he didn't push it, and I guess I never really expected him to, but it was good to see him back. So
yeah,
that was a good
feedback underneath him.
I'm not a complete SNL hater. I like Tracy Morgan, and I think I may have met some people that write for that show now, but at some point. So yeah,
you're just gonna drop that casually at the beginning of our Star Wars podcast.
I don't even know if I can't remember. I met this guy one time, and I think he wrote for SNL, but now I think he writes for Fallon. We're not like buddies or anything. I can't call him up.
Right. No, I know.
He was really.
He just ever so casually slipped that in, like, oh, I think I met some folks who write for that show. Anyway, let's go on and talk about this Star Wars trailer.
Exactly, because that's more important to me than SNL.
We're like a real Star Wars podcast, with little touches like that,
with name dropping and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I haven't gone out drinking with the voice cast of the Clone Wars or anything like that. Have you ever been in the same room as a person involved in Star Wars?
No, I don't. I can't think of any opportunity.
See, it's a real stretch to even think about it, because you're like, well,
yeah.
It's because the minute I said it, I was thinking of one specific incident where I was at the Emerald City Comic-Con, which 10 years ago was pretty low budget. It was kind of in a big room.
I think most cons were 10 years ago.
And it's now you can't get tickets for it. And if you do, it's just anxiety. It's nothing but anxiety, because you don't want to bump into people. And, it used to be you could kind of just sit in an auditorium and like, oh, William Shatner's going to come out. Oh, the cast of, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You could just sit and chill all day and hear all the, because those guys, they have their con stories completely, in the pocket at that point. So you can watch a possibly intoxicated Jonathan Frakes, talk about working on the TV show Leverage. I'm not saying he was drunk. I'm saying he was playing it up. Right. But no, I'd say for Star Wars, I think the one year I was in the same room. I walked past the booth where Amy Allen and what's her name? It was the girl that played. It's Ayala Sakura.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about.
She's the Twi'lek. She was in all three movies, but she never had any lines.
Right.
And she was right next to the gal that played. She was the bounty hunter with the long fingers in the prequels that never really. She was in the Clone Wars. Fingers? Yeah, she had like long fingers and antenna coming out.
Aura Singh.
Singh.
Did she have like a top knot and she was like?
Yeah, that's her. And she she was going to be the Boba Fett of the trilogy. Then they never kind of went back to it.
It never panned out.
So they were there looking very bored, because it was. I think this was it wasn't 10 years, more like 8 years. So it was like 2 years after the movie had come out, and they're all just kind of like, the interest had kind of died down. You could go and you could walk out with an armload of brand new in the box Star Wars vehicles for $5 or something like that, because it was all it was all prequel stuff. Like I remember I walked in there and I'm like, I walked in and I didn't bring a bag, or I didn't even know I'd never even been to a convention like that before, and I just walked out like I had like I had an A-wing and I had a this, and I'm like, she's like, how much money did you spend? I go, I spent $20 because they couldn't give that stuff away.
Yeah.
And then another year I walked by a very busy Peter Mayhew. So that and I was in an opera house twice with George Lucas.
Well, there you go.
But I don't.
You've been in a room.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. That's a stretch, man. It's like it's not like once talking to a guy who I think
Who is the what opera?
Oh no, it was a very well known Seattle-based beverage retailers.
Gotcha.
They do a stockholder meeting at an opera house every year, and George owns like $10 million in stock in this company, and his wife Melody.
He likes his bean. He's gotta have his.
Yes, I'm gonna have my coffee and stuff like that. They didn't introduce him or anything. It was just I kept hearing people say, "George Lucas is here. George Lucas is here." And I sit up way up in the balcony, and then all of a sudden I saw that white hair, and I'm like, it's him. But his wife is a board member as well, and she comes and speaks about business and customer and interrelations and.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I'm bragging. Is that what we would say? The late Harris Whittles would call a humble brag.
Sure.
Because it's not really, didn't really do, it's just all like causality.
Yeah.
Well, we've been going on a while and we haven't really talked about all the.
So I don't know. I mean, it's been pretty
Wars.
Slow in Star Wars the last week or so.
Yeah,
right? We really kind of had to stretch to find topics to talk about today.
Yeah, and we're going to do our reread of all the original Marvel comics from the 70s and talk about Jax the Rabbit.
Yeah.
So, as we agreed to before this, and now I'm spacing, we're doing posters first, right?
Yeah. So, since we last spoke with you all, again, because we were on a conference call.
Exactly.
We're on a conference call with our listeners here. Since we last spoke, we had the, I guess, second episode of Star Wars Rebels that aired that we'll get to later on. But then big Force Awakens happenings, the trailer, the sort of official, I guess they're calling it the last trailer. We'll see, because I can't imagine. I mean, I have to imagine they're going to be advertising this movie on television, and you can't do that with a, what is that, 150-second video. Like they're gonna have to, they're gonna have to cut that. They're gonna have to cut that down.
Yeah,
so.
I think that's literally what the term is. They call them like 15-second cut downs, 30-second cut downs.
Right. So that, of course, aired during Monday Night Football yesterday and hit the internet at the same time. Tickets went on sale. But before we get to the trailer, there was this big lead up to the trailer. They released the official poster for the movie, and then they released the Star Wars Twitter, Instagram accounts, I can't remember which one, released a couple of teasers for the trailer. So I guess we'll start chronologically. Sunday was when the poster hit. So let's talk about that. For those of you who haven't seen it, if you just Google Force Awakens poster, it's probably the first one that's going to show up. And it's unfortunately on a conference call. It's not a video conference call. we don't have video phones here. So
I mean, we could do a video podcast, but I am far too old and ugly to be on a video podcast.
Yeah. So let's talk about this poster, Robert.
Okay.
What are your feelings?
Okay, so my initial first blush response is I don't really like it. I don't like it.
You don't like it?
No, only, and mainly because of really only three things. It's the way that Han and Leia look.
Mm-hmm.
They literally look. I know it sounds like I'm joking, but I see it looks like they're wearing hair pieces, and it's a painting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's got her Pebbles top knot with some kind of jewel up there, which there was some question as to whether that was an extension of Chewie's hand, but I really
I think I was the only one. So for those of you who haven't seen it and don't have it in front of you, sort of left to right, top to bottom, you have Kylo Ren, Rey, what we're assuming is Starkiller Base, Finn, a tiny character who people are calling Maz Kanata, R2-D2, C-3PO, Chewbacca, BB-8, Poe Dameron, Han, Leia, a couple of stormtroopers, and Captain Phasma on the bottom there. And so, yeah, the way Han and Leia are positioned sort of right under Chewbacca's arms because he's holding that bowcaster, and I was probably the only one who thought this, that as Robert said, Leia has this kind of like Pebbles from the Flintstones kind of hair do going, or she looks like one of the Ronettes or something from the a 1960s girl group. And I thought to myself, that can't possibly be her hair. Like, they can't possibly make her look like that in this movie, can they? That must be Chewbacca's hand or something. But it turns out that is actually her hair on this poster. So I assume we will see that at some point in the movie. I can't imagine they just pulled that out of nowhere. So that's that. You're displeased with that.
Well,
with that look.
yeah, and if I can editorialize already, I will admit right now, I feel like a shitheel that the first thing I'm going after is a woman's hair on a poster.
Sure,
because it's like, but
sure.
it's
We'll acknowledge that up front.
I'll acknowledge, but But the thing is like I feel the same way about Harrison Ford's hair. It's I don't know what who's the name of the guy that made this poster.
I don't remember.
Yeah,
it's not Drew Struzan. It's someone else.
So okay, side you can almost see like this weird thing on Harrison Ford's hair, the way it lays.
It just kind of like sits on top of his hair.
Yeah,
it's like a hat.
It seems unnatural, and his face is like they actually could have. It's a movie poster. You can de-age people a little bit,
Mm-mm.
It's that kind of thing where he looks the angle that they've got him at. He looks more haggard, and I don't know. It's maybe I'm just reading too much of it, and also I really hate this kind of. I mean, I like what do they call it? I like symmetry.
Mm-hmm.
I like symmetry but at least a straight line down the middle. It's just this idea that Rey's pole or whatever she calls it, which I guess is going to be a big factor in this movie.
Staff. We'll call it a staff.
She's holding it like in everything we see her is lined up almost exactly with with Kylo Ren's plasma blade, and it's just a weird kind of like composition for the shot. I mean, I don't have any art training, so I don't know if this is actually a technique that's supposed to like. I mean, you're kind of the lightsabers are kind of creating a pyramid feel, which all the Star Wars movies, at least the original Star Wars movies posters all tend to have a pyramid locus, I guess is what they would say. They try to kind of create, that. What is the tip of a pyramid or whatever, the zenith or something like that of the triangle, not the pyramid, the triangle, to focus your energy. But the energy and the energy is focused right on Rey, who, as we'll get to later, I feel is like maybe we've underestimated her importance to this story. I mean, that's good, but it's just the darkness of her staff with the thing. It just confuses my eye, and it keeps drawing to the unreality of the human faces. Although John Boyega, I think his face looks perfect.
Yeah, I think Daisy Ridley looks fine.
Yeah, and she looks great too. I mean, but it's just everything just seems kind of like Maz Kanata. If that's Maz Kanata, it's like they had all these people and they didn't know where to put them.
Yeah. It's a little cramped. That was my first thought too. 'Cause, I mean, even Kylo Ren's lightsaber, that crossguard, it's kind of bleeding out past the border of the frame, and it's right. It's just they're cramming a lot in there. And what's interesting is that on StarWars.com, their post about this poster, sort of announcing and introducing it, they have the poster, but at the top. It's not quite a banner because it doesn't stretch all the way across, but they have essentially all the elements of that image, but just sort of spread out a little more. And it's more sort of horizontally laid out rather than vertically laid out. And I think that works a lot better. I mean, it's still pretty busy, but you get to see a little more of Starkiller Base. There's a little more space in between, the characters so that it just doesn't feel like they stuck them on there. The bit about Rey and Kylo Ren's sort of weapons parallel to each other. There's been a lot of speculation that that is like a clue about who these characters are. I think that I think this artist just decided, you know what, these are our three main characters. They all have these kinds of weapons. This is sort of the way I want to structure it. This is the best way to get them all in. Because there's also this. It's not really a rule, and it's not really. I guess I don't know what you like, a practice or just a way of composing a painting that it's based on the triangle. So, you know, if you go from the top to the bottom corners, you see this in a lot of paintings that oftentimes there's either an explicit triangle or even just sort of an implied triangular shape and focus to how the characters and everything else is laid out. So this is pretty explicit. Like there's a triangle between the two lightsabers, and then the bottom you have, you know, all the stormtroopers, and then in between, it sort of gives more focus to all of these other characters, you know, Han and Leia and Poe Dameron and BB-8 and whatever. So my guess is that it was just meant to give it that kind of shape, and so that, yeah, because they're cramming all these characters in there, they have to sort of give it some focus so that your eye isn't just going all over the place, and that this was the way to do it. And I you know, like I said, my one quibble with it is that it's really busy. But some of the other posters that were made for the original trilogy movies aren't that different. And
yeah,
so
it's not a complete it's not like, oh, this is nothing like. I mean, I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to. I think they're trying to do that 2015 version of that classic Star Wars poster, but they're trying to goose it up a little bit for right. Because I mean, I don't even know.
They have so many characters. You know, there's a lot of. They have to give you the familiar elements, the Han and Leia, and C-3PO and R2-D2, which, as far as we know, C-3PO and R2-D2 don't have major roles in this movie. We've only ever seen them in like that one shot or I guess we've seen R2-D2 in two shots. But we've only seen C-3PO once, just in that, you know, in that base of operations, that communications thing, you know, but you have to put them in there so that people see them and be like, oh, the great, it's Star Wars. And same with Han and Leia, and Chewbacca. But then at the same time, you've got 5, 6, 7 new characters on here if you include BB-8, right? So you've got Kylo Ren, Rey, Finn, Maz Kanata, BB-8, Poe Dameron, Captain Phasma. Plus, you have to introduce the new look of all of the stormtroopers. Plus, let's put some ships in there for good measure, you know, to give it that sense that there's like movement and action going on. And then Starkiller Base you throw in there, right? So I think if they didn't feel the need to include those older characters, those original trilogy characters in here, it would free up a little more space for, you know, make Poe Dameron a little more prominent, or make Captain Phasma a little bigger and more imposing. And I think it would maybe work a little better in that sense.
Yeah, it's another thing, the Poe Dameron with the helmet. I mean, I think they should have taken the helmet off of him. I don't think they needed.
Yeah, that could just be any anonymous pilot at this point.
Like Oscar Isaac's own words is that he's got that hair that basically even Harrison Ford was like, "You got a wig on there, kid." It's like let that hair fly. You know, you know, I want to see that. I want to see that black hair staying out, because he's got better hair than his co-stars. Yeah. But maybe that's why.
I mean, I will. Yeah, one thing I do like about it a lot is the use of color, and basically go across, you know, the whole spectrum. You know, on the left side you've got reds and oranges, and there's some yellows towards the middle, and then shifts over to blues and greens, and even some slight purples, and of course the black of space and the white of the stars and everything. So I think they did a great job. Like it's very colorful, and it's not just one note. Right. You know, your eyes can take in a lot of different things in that sense. So that I thought was really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like, it makes you really think like, well, in 2015, how much does the average viewer even care about the poster? And it'll be interesting down the line to find out exactly why Drew Struzan did not complete a poster, because every indication was that he was doing the poster, even after he had done.
Well, he did one that was released at Comic-Con,
right? And I assumed that was one that he was doing kind of as a warm up for his final poster. I mean, I went on Twitter to try to find some thing. It's like I never saw any indication that he said anything about. I mean, he's an older guy. He's probably not a huge Twitter guy, but he never really talked about like, oh, I'm working on the poster and all this kind of stuff. I mean, he did he not say that when they asked, he was the guy that said that he thought that this was going to be the best one of all time. And
yeah, I mean, people are saying
so he's seen it. So it's like, why did he get to see it if he, wasn't doing the movie? It just makes
people on Twitter did say who it was. I just can't remember his name.
Yeah, he's in-house. He's an in-house Lucasfilm guy.
Right. And he's also apparently like a member of the 501st, like some regional, troop.
Right.
Of the 500
there's a picture. You can find a picture of him dressed as a slightly puffy Anakin Skywalker, circa Revenge of the Sith. I just wonder if maybe that Struzan, what he turned in was deemed unsuitable for this marketing blitz that some people say isn't even really needed. It's kind of the movie that sells itself. I mean, I'm heavily speculating as I am wont to do. Just the idea that, like, it's this whole idea of continuity is so important right now to Lucasfilm. At least to Kathy Kennedy. It's like, we're bringing back all the people you love. We're bringing back all the characters we can. We're even bringing back characters, even dead characters are factoring into this movie. It's that important. And then they get the same composer, they get one of the writers, they get, that thing. And then when it comes to the poster, which to me, being an old school guy, it's like, that's important. That's like one of the important things when maybe it really isn't. Yeah. And then
I will say, I do recall when we saw that Comic-Con poster that Drew Struzan did, we weren't overly impressed with it.
Yeah, I was down on that one.
It's also possible that, we were not alone in that, and they decided, let's bring some new blood into this and a new approach.
And the one thing that I will say that these, if they're trying to evoke, the classic era, one thing that I, for the lack of a better term, and, this is, I don't even really know if this will make sense, but there is a certain element of romance, kind of this idea of deep emotion. Like, I'm looking right as I sit here, I can kind of look out the door of the studio, my basement.
Yeah.
And in my hallway, I have this, The Empire Strikes Back poster. I got it when I was like 6 or something from my 1-year membership in the official Lucasfilm fan club. And what they did is they sent you a poster of The Empire Strikes Back. It's a very simple, the outline of Vader's helmet, Luke on a tauntaun, Chewbacca and the droids, and then Han kind of leaning back Leia as he's wearing like the blue. He's kind of wearing what he wore on Bespin, and she's kind of shrouded in a almost like a blue, dark black velvet, and her hair is done up, and she's tilted back like they're going to do a kiss. Now, literally, I mean, obviously that's romance, but I mean, even the sense that in the first movie, relations aside, because this is 1977, there's a very, Luke with his lightsaber up, his chest is, thing. There's Leia's leg. It's very kind of, it's a romantic notion. It's evocative of a previous of a previous era that is now like 60 or 70 years down the road for us, and it's and even Jedi, which it was a little bit more cloistered because we're dealing with all these characters and stuff. It does kind of remind me a little bit more of Jedi than any of the other ones. But I mean, a movie, it doesn't. Movies aren't lost or won in their posters. So it's like I kind of have to make peace that I'm not super jazzed. And we're talking, this poster is going to be recreated for, sidebar ads on websites and drink cups and, Fandango website, panels. Sometimes where it might be banners the size of your thumb, and they've got to get that color. They've got to get that energy. They've got to get your focus. And maybe that's not Drew Struzan. He kind of stepped down. I mean, I think I've talked about this before. There's a great documentary about the life of Drew Struzan. And it's like, if you think his whole life is just like, well, I did posters and then I got old and stuff. It's like, no, the guy's had an interesting life. He's had personal setbacks. He was semi-retired, I think, when this came up. So, maybe it was his choice. He decided, like, I'll do one promo poster for you and I'm not going to do anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you mentioned, this was someone who did it. It was someone who was in-house to Lucasfilm. It makes sense, they've got such a big art department. It makes sense that they would try to find someone who's already there, who they're already paying, who would want to do this.
Yeah, so it's not a fail. I guess that's my point. Yeah. It's like, I don't love it, but I wouldn't. There's no scenario where you could call this a fail. It provides you your information.
Yeah, no.
Tells you who's in it, when it comes out. It shows you all your favorites. Yeah, they just don't necessarily. All of them don't look how I would want them to look. Yeah.
So let's talk about. There are some notable things in this poster, and there are some notable things that are not in this poster. We'll start with the notable things that are in this poster. The biggest of which, literally, is Starkiller Base. Everyone's assuming that Starkiller Base there in the background.
Yeah,
and I guess so it's this kind of, it's this big orb, and there's a big old laser gun or something, and on the hemisphere, along with this big trench. But it's not clear to me from looking at this whether that is a planet that they somehow built a laser into, or whether it is essentially another Death Star where it's the size of a small moon, that then they went from there. I mean, have you been able to figure that out?
Well, we'd have to jump ahead because there's indications in the trailer that that's something I saw that makes me think that yes, this is a planet with a
that they've somehow equipped with
a deliciously evil center of another.
Okay,
it's something. It's like, lack of a better term, it's like a kind of like a transformer. It's obviously, somebody had pointed out, like, Starkiller Base. It's like people just assume that was a code name for a base, when it's like it's probably a lot more than we think.
Okay, well, so we will put that aside for now. Okay. The other, going from big to small, is Maz Kanata. As we said, that's all indications are that that's Maz Kanata standing next to R2-D2. Maz Kanata being the proprietor of a castle that we were first introduced to, I guess, with the Vanity Fair article, and we got that, all of those aliens who were taking up residence or taking up merriment in her castle. Not the character though is much smaller. It's is barely as tall as R2-D2 essentially, with goggles on and everything, which is interesting to me. What do you think about this character?
Well, I think that's kind of how I've always, and I don't think I've ever talked about this, but I always assume Maz Kanata is the equivalent of like 30 years down the road of where Jabba the Hutt type character.
I had the same idea.
As long as there's,
especially from that Vanity Fair thing.
As long as there's going to be a war, there's going to be war profiteering or whatever, you know. There's going to be people making money smuggling and stuff like that. And I assume Maz Kanata, now I'm making a big jump in logic because we don't have any really information about it. But I feel that maybe she's the, at least she's the Jabba the Hutt of, I don't want to say, I don't think she's on Jakku, I assume. I always assume she was on.
I believe her castle is on a different planet.
So they're going to have to go to her at some point because they've already...
And I think that might have also come up in the trailer.
Yeah. And, if you got something like Jabba the Hutt, who's like this enormous slug character, and it was like this technological marvel to behold in 1983, and we were all just like, where do you go when you want to bring somebody in that's like, is of that element of, well, if not criminal, at least the gray market economy of
where do you get information?
Exactly. And instead of going bigger, you got to go smaller. It's that kind of thing where it's like, we've learned those lessons about, from Yoda about not judging people by their size and the Ewoks and whatnot. So I think they kind of went small with her. And that,
I agree. I think it's an interesting idea or an interesting tweak, I guess, that, you give people a similar idea that they've seen before, but you package it a little differently.
Yeah, and
if you to give it another tweak so that it's something that maybe they weren't expecting.
Yeah, and if you go back to the second teaser and the supposed pass off of Luke's lightsaber, which we've already speculated is Maz Kanata's hands, Carrie Fisher, I think, is 5'3" with heels,
right? And
her hands are pointing down to this person handing it up. So we're thinking like this is. I assumed that that she was standing on someone's stairs or something like that, but really what it looks like is that Leia's hand is receiving something from a much shorter being. Yeah. So that seems like evidence that Maz Kanata is of a diminutive size.
Yeah. All right. So two things not on this poster that a lot of people were immediately, why isn't this on the poster? The first of which is Luke Skywalker, right? We got Han and Leia, we get Chewbacca, we get Luke's droids, but there's no Luke on here. What do you think about that? Is that a clue, or is that? Is that a? I assume. How much of a clue is it? I guess since it's fair to say it probably is a clue, but how much of a clue? And what do you think it's a clue about?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to his notable absence in another piece of media we'll be talking about later. I think every indicator I've heard is that this is a story of this is a search. This is people thrown together in the search for a person, and that person is Luke Skywalker. And even though we all know there's no way J.J. Abrams could hide for 2 years that Mark Hamill grew a beard and went to England and filmed a sequence and has been in Ireland filming more sequences from as of unyet made second sequel. So there's really, how do you maintain suspense? Because it's, you just don't show them. You know what I mean? It's like you just tease it the heck out of it. Because then now you've got me going, is he alive? Is he dead? Is he a ghost? Is he, people are like, I was listening to, another podcast last night that did a midnight thing. They're like, did he go to the dark side? Is that why they're not showing him? That kind of like, why is is he going to look different? I mean, there was one leaked photo that I'm not willing to sign off on being like stuff. It could be totally a costume fitting or a, just a light test.
Right.
That just because you've seen one shot of a bearded Luke in Jedi robes doesn't mean exactly, that's what he looks like. Or that might be but that doesn't really mean anything. It's just, it's just clothes. So it's a notable, it's a telling absence. And also it's probably a subtle way of Lucasfilm saying, hey, don't pin all your hopes and dreams on Luke Skywalker coming to the rescue in this and being a major factor in the story. It's like he is you know, either him or his lightsaber is the MacGuffin of this story. You know, it's the,
Right.
if we, you know, they don't feel the need to be like, oh, he's fine. You know, like if you can get people nervous about it, that's a type of its own excitement. And you know, people are like, you know, oh, you know, what's going on? It's like, yeah, there's also a notable absence of like, you know, well, I mean, this is more of a textual thing. There's no Kenny Baker listed on the credit list. Did you notice that?
Right.
Was that your?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, he's, you know, that's the thing. You know, old Goldenrod himself has been very critical of his co-stars as of late, and I think his indicator is like, oh, you know, Kenny Baker hasn't really been in the suit for years. He's just a good luck charm. And I think every indicator is that, yeah, it's like he's not even physically in the movie. He might be he might have been an advisor to the other small person that is in the suit. And since the small person is essentially it's a stuntman role anyway, he's not going to get top billing.
Yeah, I mean it, and that's why, you know, we've so far seen R2-D2 in two shots, right? There's the shot at the funeral pyre or the fire or whatever is going on there, and it's just standing there. So you don't need Kenny Baker for that, right? You just need an empty droid. And then that one shot of R2-D2 and C-3PO in the base. And again, you don't really need R2-D2 to stand there. So, I mean, now it's obviously not necessarily representative of R2's role in the film, but you know, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the trailer. So I watched the trailer with my wife, and she is not, you know, keeping up with all of the hype and you know, leaks and everything coming out about this movie. She's like, yeah, Star Wars is fine, but whatever. So we watched the trailer together, and at the second, as soon as BB-8 showed up on the screen, she was like, "Oh, what's that?" Thanks. And I was like, "Oh, what's that droid?" She's like, "Yeah, is that supposed to be like the new R2-D2 or something?" I said, "Yeah, don't you like it?" She's like, "No, I like R2-D2 better." Right, and so of course a lot of fans are like having that debate right now, but you know, they're clearly making way for BB-8 to be like the new lovable droid that pals around and is like protective of people and is there in on all the action, and you know, not necessarily pushing R2 and C-3PO aside, but saying like, all right, you know, it's time for, you know, let's get some new ideas in here, some new droids.
Yeah, I mean, they have
to populate this world.
I mean,
and so yeah, Kenny Baker not being on the post, that's not very surprising to me.
Yeah, and also it's kind of, you know, it's more evidence of how Lucasfilm, the Disney era of Lucasfilm, is, you know, they're massaging the histories to be able to integrate new characters to keep it fresh. Because honestly, if we were just like, I think there would be people that would say like, oh, you know, it's another adventure with C-3PO and R2-D2. It's like, you know, it's like he did R2-D2 did everything in the prequels. By the end, he had like, you know, oil jets, you know, jets.
Right. He could fly around.
Yeah. And it's like, even though those movies take place chronologically before the original trilogy, it's like those are still pretty fresh in people's minds. And it's kind of like, you know, you got to make room for other concepts, especially if it necessitates the story that, you know, that,
it's 30 years later, you know.
Yeah, we get a lot of indicators that if that is Luke's hand, that somehow maybe if Luke is is kind of out in hiding, that he took R2 with him. So
yeah, possibly.
He would be, it would be a situation where you wouldn't see him till the end of the movie anyway, you know?
Right.
It's kind of makes you wonder. It's like, well, you know, R2-D2 and C-3PO weren't really palling around until like the last third of Attack of the Clones. I mean, they weren't part, you know, and then they got split up, and, you know, they were all together in the first movie and the last movie, but, you know, they were, most of the time they were just kind of on their separate missions. And
Yeah. But I mean, so to jump back to the fact that Luke is not represented on this poster, General Hux is not also represented on this poster.
right.
Supreme Leader Snoke is also not on this poster. Whoever Max von Sydow's character is not represented on this poster. And then the other, I think Luke probably does have a reduced role in this movie. Just that all indications are that. But I would also say I was looking back at the original trilogy posters. The Emperor is not on any of them, not even Return of the Jedi, where, the Emperor has a substantial role. He's the Emperor is the villain of the whole first 6 movies, essentially. Palpatine. And Palpatine only shows up on one poster, and that's The Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
Now he shows up on the special edition Empire Strikes Back poster, but also not the special edition Return of the Jedi poster. The original Return of the Jedi poster has Luke, Han, Leia, Lando, Wicket, the Ewok, Jabba, Bib Fortuna, and a Gamorrean guard. And that's kind of it, right? And so
what a weird grouping of characters when like half of those are unimportant.
Yeah. Oh, and Darth Vader, of course. I left out Darth Vader. But and I understand. Okay, Jabba and maybe Bib Fortuna makes sense because they're interesting creatures. You want to highlight those characters and those character designs. The Ewok makes sense because that's a big chunk of the movie. You obviously want you want to keep Billy D. Williams happy, so you put Lando in there. But the Gamorrean Guard I thought was interesting because it's not, the Gamorrean Guards are only in there briefly, and it's not really a story beat, but as an indicator in the script, in the movie, as an indicator of sort of what Luke can do as a Jedi now, right? Having those Gamorrean Guards in the beginning that he kind of pushes aside with the Force, and then the one guard that gets eaten by the Rancor, that's sort of an important part of the movie, even though the Gamorrean Guard disappears immediately. But right, like the Rancor wasn't on the poster, and why didn't they want to highlight that? Right, I guess they wanted an element of surprise for that. So, or
the Twilight Dancers and all that.
Yeah,
or the EV, the was it the EV something droid?
EV-99.
Yeah.
I mean, so even if you think of, right, if you take George Lucas's version of this, which is like the Emperor is the main villain of all 6 movies, Palpatine's the main villain. You only get the main villain on one movie, and that's the last one released chronologically, where he actually turns into the Emperor. But even Return of the Jedi, where a good chunk of the movie takes place in the Emperor's chambers. You get the Emperor's chambers on the poster, but you don't get the Emperor himself. And so not having someone on the poster, I would say, is not necessarily suggestive of that character's role within the movie.
Yeah, I mean,
previous evidence indicates that, these people might have bigger roles and they're just not on the poster for some reason.
I mean, and that's also, you have to take into account that, J.J. Abrams loves to manipulate the audience, and he knows the techniques, and we'll get into that when we get into the trailer.
Yeah. So the other big thing missing that a lot of people were making some hay about was George Lucas doesn't have a credit on this poster at all. There's no based on characters created by, there's no, story by, there's nothing to suggest that George Lucas had anything to do with this other than the Lucasfilm logo, and I guess Industrial Light and Magic because he created them. But, the word, just the name Lucasfilm is on there, but nothing to suggest that this movie wasn't in any way inspired by George Lucas. And people are saying even on, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies, Gene Roddenberry's name is on the poster as, based on characters created by, or, something like that, whereas Lucas doesn't get the same credit here. I don't think that's as big of a deal, but what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's that old thing where people always love, it's considered, it's considered manners to tip the hat. People going into a different world, people still complain about the fact that Jay Leno didn't thank Johnny Carson the first night he took over the Tonight Show. I mean, it's like this thing where that's everybody kind of set against him because it's like he didn't go, oh, thanks, Johnny. But they're really trying to, they're trying to push this forward. I mean, if you get too much, like, then you get to, like, picking on Colin Jost again. You get in this situation where, like, the first day he took over on Weekend Update, I'm not a Colin Jost fan, as you can tell. He thanked Lorne Michaels. He thanked, Seth Meyers. And it's like he hadn't even told a single joke yet. And it's like, it's presumptuous in some respect because it might, I'm pretty sure this isn't going to happen, but it could come out. People could go, wow, what a heap of shit. And then George would be like, take my name off of this. Take my name off of this movie. I don't want anything to do with it. Maybe it might be indicative of the way George feels, that he's like, I sold it. I don't have any creative, either put my name on it and let me come in and take a pass at stuff, or take my name off of it and you guys bought it for $4.2 billion. I'm this daddy, but it's like my kids have grown and they got married and they changed their name. It's that kind of attitude.
Yeah, I take more of, I guess, an Occam's razor view of this, which is I'm just assuming that he signed away those rights when he gave Lucasfilm over to Disney, right? And that either unconditionally or, if they had used some of his story ideas for the script, then maybe he would have gotten like an additional story credit or something like that. But
because Arndt is still on here as a story.
Yeah, and so I think it's just a matter of like, look, he signed everything over to Disney. Disney gets to do what they want with it, and maybe there's like a courtesy thing, but I as a Star Wars fan, and you and I both, we give George Lucas, we don't praise George Lucas unconditionally, but even as a Star Wars fan and as someone who in other areas might say like, maybe you just do that as a courtesy, like it doesn't cost anything to throw his name on there. But then maybe it does, right? Because if you put his name on there, then you have to keep paying him.
Yeah.
He gets residuals, and so that's why I think that he likely just signed those residuals. Any and all chance of gaining any kind of residuals from this movie, he just signed away the rights to those to Disney, and so it's just he doesn't get to have his name on them anymore, and that's the choice he made, and he is clearly comfortable with that choice, and so. I think people need to get comfortable with that as well.
It's funny, too, because, it says Lucasfilm in the bottom right. That is his name.
Right. His legacy continues.
Is represented.
Even
though that was a sticking point when he had a dispute with the DGA over A New Hope, because he set that tone with the idea that there's no credits at the beginning of the film except for the main title. No actor credits, and it's that, I guess, I don't know if it's the DGA or something that had these stipulations that the actors needed to be, their names need to be presented within a certain time frame of this, or you get fined. And then Lucas said, "Hey, I'm not even credited on there," and they go, "Oh no, it says Lucasfilm at the front." This is from this is paraphrased from the Dave Pollock book. He goes, "Well, my name isn't George Lucasfilm." Right. So, he actually left the DGA in disgust over that kind of, that's a union thing, and then up against the creative thing, and I guess they couldn't find a mitigation, or he had to pay a fine, and Fox just paid the fine, and let's knock on wood. Let's hope that either that rule isn't applying anymore, or Disney's just paying the fine for not having your actors up front. Because I don't need to see a Star Wars movie with people moving through a forest and having actors' names, appearing in the trees, and no, thank you. But
yeah. So that's that's the poster. Is there something else you want to talk about with the poster?
No,
I think that's all I had.
I'm good.
All right, so that was Sunday, and of course that just built more and more anticipation for the events of Monday. I guess the teasers came out on Sunday as well. So by this point, it had been announced that, yes, indeed, confirming previous rumors, the trailer would air during Monday Night Football. And so the Star Wars social media accounts pinged out, a couple of, in one case, it was like 6 seconds, anywhere from like 6 to 15 second, just short clips, short teasers to basically promote the promotion that they were going to conduct on Monday Night Football. Yeah.
Promote the promotion of the movie that they're promoting.
Yes. So there were 4 of them. There was one that was just sort of a general teaser where you saw sort of all of the big 4 new characters, Rey, Finn, Poe, Kylo Ren. And then there was one that was just Poe and Finn. There was one that was just Rey. And then there was one that was just BB-8. And I like them. I mean, it feels a little, considering we have this 2.5 minute trailer to talk about, it feels a little silly now to talk about the teasers, but I mean, I thought they were effective. And, because they gave us glimpses of what the movie looked like that we hadn't seen before in some cases.
Yeah, I will say that there is a shot that's not recreated in the trailer. There's actually 2 or 3 shots not recreated or presented in the trailer. One is of what we assume is the First Order ships flying over a forested planet as Rey looks up, kind of concerned. It is kind of strangely evocative of the invasion of Naboo from the Phantom Menace.
Yeah,
in my opinion. Maybe that's why it didn't make it to the actual trailer proper. They want to do anything to make people think, hey, didn't we just see these?
Right. That teaser was actually my favorite of the 4. So one thing we also got with these teasers, at least with 2 of them, was some music that we hadn't heard before, at least those recordings of it. But oddly enough, the Rey teaser was the one without any music.
Right.
But I liked it a lot, in part because, like you said, that's a shot we had not seen before. Any of the other, we hadn't even seen anything like that angle before, I don't think.
No, I don't think we've ever had any people. There was that was obviously something that didn't make it to the final cut of A New Hope, is that Luke would look up with his macro binoculars at a battle in the sky. So thematically, it was something that Lucas had attempted, and opted not to use. So I guess it is the first time it really kind of has been used, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, and you said you were reminded of the invasion of Naboo. I was reminded. This is a little bit of a stretch, but of Return of the Jedi, when the Emperor arrives on the second Death Star, and you have all of those TIEs flying in formation around, the circumference of the Death Star, just kind of those formations, and that was. It gave you a much better sense of like the scope of how big, like, wow, they have enough TIEs that they can just all fly around the Death Star in formation. And, this is like a big event. This is like a big deal. Wow, they're really, it's an empire, and this had sort of a similar feeling for me of, cause we've seen, prior to that, we had seen a couple TIEs here and there chasing after the Millennium Falcon and everything, and we had seen Kylo Ren's shuttle or landing ship. I'm not really sure, whatever. And we had seen the troop transport, landing ship. But this was, I think, the first time that we got a sense of like, oh yeah, the First Order has like a bunch of ships, and when they come into a planet to invade it, or when they bring their forces in for a fight, like they have it. Yeah. And like we were saying, and we're seeing that from a camera angle that I don't think have seen in Star Wars before, and that was really cool to me.
Yes.
So the other teasers, two of them had music. This was the sort of general one, and then also the Poe and Finn one. It had the same music. They had the same music, which was the Force theme that was first introduced in A New Hope and is played all over the place. It was in French horns, but it was different. I think it's a new recording. The rhythm was a little different. I'm pretty sure that's an edit, that they edited the Force theme, that recording. They edited that to make it fit the time constraints of the trailer. But I'll talk a little bit more about the music later when we get to the trailer. And then the one with BB-8, was that the first time we had actually heard BB-8 sort of speak, quote unquote? Hear his like electronic bleeps and bloops.
I thought I'd heard. I mean, you
may have heard it, yeah.
In a trailer of some sort, yes. I mean, we've heard the toys and the
right. And it's lower. The pitches are lower than R2D2, and the tones are slightly different. They're like a little.
Yeah, it's almost like
this is very like music nerdy, but the tones are a little rounder. It almost reminded me a little more of the Tals, the like big white fur thing that kind of flicked its nose or tongue or whatever in the Mos Eisley Cantina in A New Hope.
Oh, honestly, it kind of put me in the mind of the Boobah droids that helped birth the Skywalker twins for some reason. Yeah, I mean, I think whereas Ben Burtt had created R2 out of, I think it's a combination of like shards of dry ice being stirred around in a, what was it? It's like stirred around in an old styrofoam cooler mixed with something from an ARP 2600 synth. It's like those kind of things. It's like the old, well, not at the time, it was the height of synth technology. This monophonic synth, which you can, if you ever need to see it, you can go watch a midnight special version of Edgar Winter Group's Frankenstein, because he plays one in it. And I think that's the thing. And then it's like that kind of thing is like either shards of metal or something being spun around in dry ice in a plastic or styrofoam bucket of some sort. Whereas this sounds more of it's a modulated human voice run through some kind of low pass filter. There's more phonetic phenomes, I think is the term, to it. There's more of a lyrical quality rather than kind of a machine quality to it. And it does kind of resonate in that sub, which it might actually kind of act, at a certain frequency that in a theater, then the subs kick in. It might actually start to kind of kick in some of the subwoofers in a theater presentation. Whereas, R2 was always kind of pitched a lot higher. When he got more agitated, he'd whistle almost,
Right.
Like a teapot. Whereas this sounds, this is more kind of like...
Or like...
He's like BB-8 is like the EDM droid. He's kind of got the he's more into digital stuff, and he's got a small modular system that he doesn't use as much. But it's definitely like it. You can get this feeling that he's talking more. He's talking more in kind of English.
His vocabulary is more extensive, maybe.
Yeah.
Or the range of sounds he can make is a little wider. So anything more on the teasers that you wanted to talk about?
No, I'm chomping at the bit to get into this trailer.
All right. So Monday comes. I guess we can talk about tickets later if you want, but the trailer dropped. We finally got the trailer on Monday. I mean, even just the few days that we knew it was coming, like the anticipation among people who do Star Wars podcasts anyway. The anticipation had been building, and it was already just in a couple days. It was so high. So the trailer. So let's talk about this trailer, Robert. What do you want to say about this trailer? Do you want to go through kind of shot by shot? Do you want to just pick out big things to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I will just start by saying, I'm trying.
So let's go through sort of beat by beat.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to find my notes.
Say what you were going to say.
I'm trying.
If you had something sort of a big.
I'm trying to. I sent you like all my. I sent that thing last night saying, "Oh, here's all my notes," and then don't put it in the outline, and then I can't find them. The email. Anyway. So
I'll start off saying it. I mean, I thought the trailer was very good. While also recognizing that like it's a movie trailer, it's designed to do a thing, it has a particular purpose, and so I thought it served that purpose really, really well. Now, what's interesting is that today I have read two pieces making the same point, but sort of from different perspectives. One is that. So this is on RollingStone.com. David Ehrlich has a thing called "Why Star Wars Trailer May Be J.J. Abrams' Real Masterpiece," and the point he's making is that like this, all of this thing that it's like a meta point basically, that this whole thing that we're talking about, this unveiling of a thing, is what J.J. Abrams is really good at, less so than the actual thing itself. So if you think of Lost or if you think of Cloverfield, right? He takes his mystery box approach, and then like the gradual opening of the mystery box. Ehrlich is saying like that's what J.J. Abrams is better at than what's actually in the box, and that this Star Wars trailer is like the ultimate unveiling of a mystery box. Like this whole thing, he's been sort of parceling out information bit by bit, culminating in this trailer, and he's doing that thing, that unveiling so well that's sort of his big masterpiece. The other is on Birth Movies Death, and this is Devin Faraci arguing that
noted cantankerous movie reviewer,
but he's making, I think, a similar point, but from the opposite point of view, which is that J.J. Abrams, he is taking the position that J.J. Abrams didn't really want to release this trailer because he doesn't like all of this, promotion, giving out any information. That, this trailer is, even though we don't learn that much more about the movie than people might already have known, again, at least people who make Star Wars podcasts knew or had heard, that it's basically like a reluctant process. It's
it's the everything and nothing.
J.J. Abrams is so wedded to this mystery box idea. He says the new trailer feels to me very much like the trailer cut by someone who doesn't want to cut a trailer, the work of someone who is meeting a corporate expectation he would rather shun. Which, I mean, and it's fun. I just think it's really interesting that you can have basically two completely opposite perspectives on this movie trailer, right? This idea that like, okay, well, we're promoting this movie, and one person saying like, yeah, it's really good because that's what J.J. Abrams is good at, and another person like, yeah, it's good, but J.J. Abrams did not want to do it, or it looks like he did not want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, and I'm not going to bag on Devin Faraci because I think he's he's probably I was going to say this that this, because it's going to sound like I am bagging on him, because he's super astute, he's really smart, and he knows movies, but sometimes his ego gets in the way of the way he views things, and I've listened to his podcast, The Canon, which is I enjoy it, but then sometimes he can be a bit hard to take because he gets in these opinions. He gets
very worked up about how he feels about a movie
and he we're like, he and I are like the exact same age, so I understand the sentiment. I mean, he's also been a movie reviewer for like 12 years or whatever. But the thing is that I think he thinks he knows J.J. Abrams' mind because he's met him and he spent time with him, and he keeps when he talks about Star Wars, which comes up a lot on the Canon.
Yeah,
And he also used to be the Birth Movies Death cast host, but he's stepped down, and it's run by 2 other writers for them. Which I still enjoy that podcast, and actually recommend it's called the Birth Movies Death podcast. Go find it. He has these anecdotes. I spent time with him, and I know, that kind of thing, where he thinks he knows all of J.J. Abrams' motivations, and it's like, and I think it's impossible to know this guy's mind as well as he thinks he does when it comes to this kind of situation. There's no way that J.J. Abrams could have walked into Lucasfilm to negotiate the contract for this and said, "You guys aren't going to make me do a trailer, are you?"
Right.
Because, I mean, that's the people were buying, in the 90s, $7 tickets and walking out 2 minutes later. So there's no realistic scenario where JJ will go, "Yeah, I want to do this, but don't make me do a trailer." So and my litmus test for these trailers, and it's a crappy litmus test, but it's mine, is that how do I feel when I'm done? How do I physically, and I actually I'll say it because it's my podcast and I pay the bills. It's embarrassing to admit to the world. It's like when these things work, I literally get a chill. Like I have a physical reaction, and that doesn't happen very often to me, because it's like, I didn't get it when I saw the poster, and I didn't get it when I saw the teasers, but when I saw the first, the mini teasers, but when I saw the first teaser, with the darkness and the light, I got it, and when I saw it again with the Force is strong in my family thing, I got it, and when this ended, at the very end, which we won't talk about. It's like I had the hairs on my arms were sticking up, and it was just like, it was almost like uncomfortable, because it was like, wow, he really, I feel, simultaneously touched on to something very familiar, while by creating a sense of mystery and anticipation, where it's not, and I feel like it's a extremely successful trailer, because I don't feel like I know a damn thing about this movie when I got done watching it. And I've seen it 10 times, this trailer, and I still don't think I can speculate. I can tell you what I think, but I don't know. It's the thing, and it's like and I think that's the best trailer, apart from the trailer where the person is able to kind of, provide something without, like an Alfred Hitchcock trailer where he'll just go, "Oh, this is a chair." Something really awful.
I've made a movie, and it's a mystery about a chilling event.
And you could never do that.
I think you'll like it. Watch it, won't you?
Yeah.
Good evening.
You could never do that with a Star Wars movie, but that's kind of what he's doing. He's taking you around. He's showing you your favorites. He's not showing you all your favorites. And he's bringing in some of the new ones that look enough, like they did enough of a good job to make it look like your favorites, where it's all of a sudden it's like, well, he's my favorite. It's like that phenomenon where it's like we have mutual friends that are complaining. It's like I'm being marketed to so heavily that I'm supposed to care about these new characters, but deep down, I think, and this is my words, deep down, it's like you're still liking it. It's like, there's this weird logical disconnect where you're like, well, why do I give a shit about Oscar Isaac? Why do I give a shit about Daisy Ridley or John Boyega? And it's like, well, no, at the end of it, you really do. You're like, I want to know everything. I like these people, and I don't want anything bad to happen to them. And like, what's going to happen? And I mean, that's the best you can hope for. That's the best you can hope for with a movie like this.
And I will say I'm probably sort of in between those, where I am very aware that I am being marketed to, right? And that this whole thing is to get me to buy movie tickets and consume this product as much as I can.
Absolutely.
I am very conscious of that. Damn it if I don't want to see this movie.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. Like I was saying, this trailer is designed to do a thing, and it's very effective at doing that thing, because I really want to see this movie now. And I would I think that would be true if it wasn't a Star Wars, that if it was just some like random movie that was
New
that
property or
this
something.
was a trailer for, and obviously that can't be the case because there's a lot of stuff in this movie related to Star Wars that they don't explain. They just assume that the audience has knowledge of, right? The stuff about the Force and the Jedi, whatever, right? They assume, okay, people know what the Jedi are.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
And so it wouldn't be cut exactly this way if this wasn't a Star Wars movie, but I mean, it's really, really effective for making me at least say like, yeah, I want to see this movie. Like, yeah, I'm still worried that it might be boring in parts, but I want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about an effective trailer. I mean, the movie might suck. I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, this is a slam dunk.
This trailer proves that this movie is going to be the greatest Star Wars.
This trailer proves nothing except that it's a fantastic trailer. That, it in some ways, I almost have to concede that, it'll probably never live up to the promise and the hype. Because it is 38 years of history built up here. That it's sitting atop this 2 hour and 16 minute, which it's probably 2 hours and 10 with, if you think about it, if it's a typical Star Wars movie, it's got 6 minutes of credits and it'll have a 3 minute, silent denouement like every other Star Wars movie. Mm-hmm. So you're really only going to be getting, 2 hours and, 7 minutes of actual story. Well, then another minute of, stuff. It's like, you just round it off 2 hours of story. And there's no way that 2 hour movie of story is going to satisfy everybody's, things that they want. There's going to be I'm sure there's going to be a ton of divided people. I don't think that's actually going to hurt the movie. I think that means people are going to keep going and seeing it over and over and arguing points. No, so yeah, I mean, I guess I got it I guess my point was it went down there was that, it's just a feeling you don't get to have very often. And it's definitely a manipulation. It's like you have to kind of give in to the idea that, because it's entertainment. Entertainment is a manipulation of the, I feel better about being manipulated watching a movie than I do watching a debate of political candidates. And because it's like, if you put your blinders on and you choose to overlook the flaws, it's not going to hurt you. It's as much as if you don't pay attention to who you're voting for, it might hurt you in the long run. But that's not a pointed political message. It's just
no. I understand what you mean. Right. I mean, the politics versus a movie, right? The stakes are lower.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I guess to the point I think you made right before my internet cut out was, I mean, I'm not even sure it's possible to like break Star Wars at this point because of the prequels and, both because, for casual people, the prequels already kind of like broke Star Wars, and even some hardcore fans, right? The prequels already kind of broke Star Wars. So as long as the episode 7 isn't as bad as those in those people's minds, like it'll be fine. And then also there's just kind of this base level, like there's a floor. There's like a solid core of people who are just going to like this movie no matter what, right? And so that core is big enough that like I don't think J.J. Abrams could like break Star Wars with a bad movie. So I won't use the phrase like make or break Star Wars. I mean, but I will say what will I guess determine how long this movie runs in theaters, how broad of an audience it reaches of, not just the hardcore folks, but the casual fans, how much this kind of helps build Star Wars back up as a film franchise for, the next 5-6 years, will depend much more on the 120 plus minutes not shown in this trailer. Right. Because in the trailer, you have, the X-Wings and the TIE fighters and the Millennium Falcon flying around, and like all that looks great. So J.J. Abrams clearly like has a solid handle on at least that aspect, or at least he seems to. He got some nice emotional moments in there that are kind of like a lot of the sort of the big pieces without but it's that context, that bed on which those big pieces rest,
right,
has to be right in order for the whole thing to work, really. And that's the part that we still haven't seen yet, right? And so that,
right, yeah,
this trailer being a really, really good trailer doesn't necessarily mean much for the rest of it. The rest of it meaning, like, again, episode 8, episode 9, Rogue One, the Han Solo movie, all of that kind of stuff. If this movie ends up being like Attack of the Clones, where this 7-minute stretch is interesting, Obi-Wan fighting Jango Fett, and then, flying through the asteroid field, and, the seismic chart. Like, that part was nice. And yeah, the end, you have the Clone Wars, and that part was kind of cool. But man, there's this like 40-minute stretch in the middle where there is nothing happening, right? Like, if this movie is like that, then it's incumbent on Rian Johnson to he has to put a little more effort into it. Now, I have heard some people say that, like, oh, J.J. Abrams is really good at, like, pacing, and he doesn't let things drag too much. I'm not as familiar with his work outside of the first Star Trek movie to know. I know people weren't that thrilled with Into Darkness, but he may have been preoccupied. I don't know.
Yeah, Into Darkness, it went by at such a good clip that story kind of got completely sidelined in it. And also, I think if you're trying, and essentially what the problem with that is it was it was their weird mirror universe remake of Wrath of Khan,
right?
And even right down to the idea of, like, which I'm sure J.J. Abrams has learned his lesson about having Spock, scream Khan or whatever, or killing off Kirk, and then being like, oh no, we'll just give him that last minute infusion. It was almost like he felt. My problem with JJ on that movie is that I felt like he checked out, and it had a great beginning, like this opening, like kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark, James Bond preamble to a movie. And yes,
right.
It doesn't make sense that the Enterprise is underwater, but whatever. I mean, I'm not that much of a nitpicker about stuff like that. It was just then the dang thing just grinded to a halt. Even though there were, it grinded to the halt because it was like all of a sudden it's like, well, we're in a hospital, and there's this subplot, and how important is this guy going to be? And I actually attribute a lot more of that to, Roberto Orsi and Lindelof and there's one other cohort in that group.
Right.
Kreutzmann or something like that. Kurtzman. I'm sorry, I forget their names. And I'm not a fan of those guys. And I think those guys had an agenda with that movie that even maybe J.J. Abrams didn't pick up on. And because, I mean, Star Trek has all these, allegorical elements to it that in my feeling, Star Wars doesn't have the burden of. And
right.
Hopefully it will never have the burden.
There's not as much like Joseph Campbell hero's journey in Star Trek.
No. Yeah. I mean, that whole thing, its template was set years before that even became a popular thing that people would refer to. I mean, I don't want to talk about Star Trek though. But, going to going to the actual trailer, first shot.
Yeah. So let's go through the trailer.
So that first shot of the goggles of, I assume is Rey.
Yeah, it is Rey.
It's so weirdly evocative. Like, it's like she's wearing like this kind of Tusken Raider sand thing that looks like it's, sewn together with, rough cotton and maybe like, the eyes out of an old Stormtrooper helmet or something like that. And a little light. It's like, that's so, like, in some ways, it's so different than anything they've ever done. They cut, there's no Lucasfilm logo. It cuts right to it. And it's just like, and it shows you the scope immediately. This idea that, that she's swinging from these ropes, and she, there's that quick shot where she looks like she's trying to peel something off of a it looks like a pod racing engine, but it's obviously not. It's some kind of coil or something, and then quickly you hear this weird sound, and then her head turns and it cuts to that thing where she's shimmying down a rope. And just that event, which is we assume is the docking bay of a Super Star Destroyer.
Yeah.
And it's so, the massive scale of that, it's just breathtaking, right? It's like you never, that's one of the big problems that, practical effects has, is that, and even George had problems with it the way he did effects for the prequels. It's almost impossible to show that kind of massive scale. You keep thinking to yourself, like, it just doesn't quite look right. I don't believe that this person is in this huge, vast thing, and they just nailed it in that one shot where it's just like, yeah, this is huge.
Yeah, and again, that's something that hasn't really been done in Star Wars before. There was a cavern, obviously, in Empire Strikes Back where the Millennium Falcon hid out, but that was sort of made to feel kind of claustrophobic,
right?
And they were hiding. It was, they found a crevice that they could fit into to hide from these TIE fighters. And so it wasn't meant to feel so massive and immense and empty and cavernous. And then the only closer thing I could think of in the prequels was Utapau, where you had these huge sinkholes, these really deep sinkholes where their cities were. But, those were so heavily populated. And that was the thing with Lucas, like he just always wants to put more things in the background.
Right.
The way he did that with special editions and because he was working digitally with these prequels, it's like, yeah, just stick another 10 stormtroopers in the back or clone troopers in the back of it, or, just throw another bunch of guys in there, throw another ship in there. And so to me, it never felt that cavernous or that expansive or that empty, because it wasn't empty. There were just people all over the place. And that could also be, I think what you're getting to is a question of like the camera angles that they use, where, Lucas maybe went for tighter shots for some of these things, whereas, Lucas, Abrams is like, yeah, let's show the fact that she's rappelling down, down into this entire completely empty Star Destroyer. And what's that like? Not just to have, because the Star Destroyers themselves, we got a sense of how big they were on the interior, at least the docking bays, but there were always a bunch of people around, even in the original trilogy. And so to have just like one person even walking through that, and in this case, rappelling through it, that's a much different feeling. So you're right. It's a really interesting, again, it's this kind of tweak on what we've seen before, but like, okay, how can we recontextualize it or show it in a slightly different way?
Yeah, it's like you could only hope to achieve that by showing scale, by providing people with something that they already have some familiarity with. And then another little thing that that I notice is the particulates in the air. It's a dusty planet. That's a thing. One of those things about Lucas is that the prequels were so sterile. Because we live in a used universe, and then my prequels are the new universe. But just the idea that, dust on things, sand on things. It's like, it's when she shimmies down, I think there's the light is diffused and it's just...
And I was thinking about this in the context of later on in the trailer where it's raining, and we'll get to that later, and then snowing as well, like actively snowing, which is, I don't know that, there were kind of storms, and it was raining on Camino in episode 2. But other than that, we don't, George Lucas never really focused on the weather that much. He wanted to put a sandstorm in both A New Hope and Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And I guess he might have finally sort of put one in episode 1, but I think that also, I can't remember how much of that actually made it into episode 1.
It's very small. It's just like, we got to give him the ship, and it was just like, it went away so quickly.
Yeah.
And it didn't look very good.
But that sandstorm was really the only like weather thing that he was really interested in, right? He had like an ice planet and a jungle planet, and sand planet, a desert planet, but what the weather is like there, other than it being super hot on the desert planet. He didn't give much context for it, and so just having that, like you said, just like the dusty air and the particulate matter in the air, having it rain, when you see the Knights of Ren later on, like it just lends more atmosphere to everything, that it just sort of roots it a little more solidly, and like, oh, this is like an actual planet that experiences weather. This isn't just like a digital construct that they, stuck someone on a green foam chair and then built it around them.
Right. And one of the nice things about, so when we get into that dialogue, so she's rappelling down into this massive thing. We assume she's scavenging or something, because I think that's what they think. Then a voice, which we assume is Maz Kanata, just because it kind of sounds like Lupita Nyong'o.
And I think right before we started recording, I read something that said like Disney Insider, I think, confirmed that it was Maz Kanata.
Okay. So, and then it's like, who are you? It was like, I'm nobody, I'm nothing, or whatever. And it really,
I'm no one.
And I'm no one. That's it. And it's like, I've seen it 10 times and I can't quote it. It's so great because you're showing literally her in perspective of this massive skeleton of the Empire and of the previous trilogy, and the kind of idea where it's like, I feast on the bones of, kind of the old ways. And it, like, essentially I'm nobody. It's, all these things happened at another time. We exist on the detritus of things that we don't even know about, because it's happened so long ago. And there's kind of like when there's that next shot of her kind of wandering the desert, presumably back to wherever she lives with BB-8, and there's kind of just this quiet resolve, and then she looks out to a ship, which I couldn't quite get a good feel for what that ship was shaped like. It was just a shadow. It's just this kind of...
Yeah, I couldn't... It was sort of triangular, but not in the sense that a Star Destroyer would be triangular.
Yeah, it almost looked kind of a bit like the transport that they were on in Attack of the Clones that left it kind of has a weird kind of like a wedge.
Yeah. With the three, are you talking about the big one with like kind of the three engines?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it looked similar. I had that impression too.
And you can get like, oh, she's looking at it, she's yearning to leave this planet because it's obviously not a great life there, and it's like that's such a theme, especially with the and I don't want to read too much into it because I think there is a sense of manipulation here. This idea of the Skywalkers, Anakin wants to leave Tatooine, Luke wants to leave, and if Rey is some connection to them, but it just might be a thematic touchstone rather than a literal touchstone of the idea that, I mean, and then we cut. Are we kind of done with that one, or did you want?
Well, the one thing I would say is when we hear Rey saying "I'm no one," while she's walking across the desert, or we're seeing her from behind, she's walking away from the camera. It has this sort of reverse High Plains Drifter kind of feel to me, where she's at least not revealing her identity, and she just kind of High Plains Drifter just kind of shows up in this town, and she's just sort of leaving, and we're not really sure where even she's going. She's just walking away, and I get the next piece of it. I think you're moving to, which is Finn. When he shows up and he starts giving his little spiel about who he is or who he used to be. Finn, I think someone figured this out from the toys, the talking toys. His stormtrooper designation is FN 2187. And so the speculation that is like, okay, well, Finn isn't really his name, where it's just a name that he invented for himself based on his designation. So it's sort of a similar idea where he just kind of crashes on Jakku. He just kind of shows up on this planet, not really having sort of just having sort of an identity that he's creating for himself, just like a name that he's like, yeah, I'm just Finn, whatever.
Yeah.
Just call me by my designation. So that, and which I guess kind of I don't know if it reinforces, but it ties again into this this mythology of the hero's journey and what you were talking about with this kind of sense of yearning to leave your current circumstances and enter the bigger world, the broader world that is just outside of, just beyond your doorstep, essentially.
Yeah, and the way that line is read, it kind of puts it all of a sudden kind of raises this idea that, and maybe I'm jumping ahead of it, but I have this kind of theory now that all this dialogue has been completely manipulated to be purposely vague, and for us to read way too much into certain things, that these aren't necessarily things that are actually said in the movie. Or if they're said in the movie, they're not said in the same context, because it's like Rey. The only time you actually see the dialogue coming out of their mouth is in the middle of the trailer, and mostly it's kind of evocative of, in 1999 when the Phantom Menace, right before it came out, they released these things called the tone poems. Yeah, and they were kind of like these heavy-handed explanations of kind of their position of, kind of like who I am,
announcing who they are as a character.
And that's kind of a little bit of what I've got in this trailer. It's like, at least for the people that we don't know already, and a lot of it, the quality of the tone of the way things are said sometimes changes mid-sentence. Where it's like, I can kind of hear the difference. Like, this part of the sentence sounds like it was, this sentence sounds like it was spoken in an enclosed area. And this one actually sounds like it's more of a, this one was kind of done outside. Yeah. Which makes me think that, like, that's kind of, we're not, there's not going to be a line where Finn says that. Or if he does, it's kind of hard to
There's like some words in between his first and second sentence.
Exactly, and that's kind of the way...
I'm pretty sure the dialogue was pretty heavily edited.
And I don't want to jump ahead to this, where are we at next? And you can also... that's jumping.
I guess if we're going to stick with Finn, I mean, you, in your notes, had mentioned that shot of him standing on the ridge looking down over whatever that little town or market on Jakku is. I mean, that's to me, I mean, that is, I'm assuming, an intentional callback to A New Hope, when you had Luke and Obi-Wan and the two droids looking out over Mos Eisley.
Yeah, Star Wars 101.
Because that had been prefaced right before that scene, with Luke going back to the homestead and finding his aunt and uncle killed, and he says to Obi-Wan, I'm going to come with you to Alderaan. There's nothing for me here now. And that's, if putting the pieces together that we have, I mean, it seems like that's the similar moment for Finn, where he was a stormtrooper, and that is over, and he ended up on Jakku, and it's time to start something else, and so he's gonna head down there and see what's doing. And that also, again, ties back into the Joseph Campbell hero's journey. I keep attributing it to him. Of course, he is culling this from a bunch of different sources, but people sort of know it as Joseph Campbell. That there's this crossing the threshold moment where you take your first step into a larger world. Exactly. And that's sort of what that moment was for me. Now, backing up just a few seconds in that trailer, right before we see Finn, we see Finn sort of taking off his helmet, and then later we see Finn standing over that ridge, but in between there we see a shot of a TIE fighter crashing. It's sort of breaking up into different pieces and crashing to the planet. There's a Star Destroyer hanging above it, and then there's that TIE fighter, but we never see what exactly causes the TIE fighter to break up and wreck. And so I don't know if... Right, so we have all these theories about these things, and I don't know how much to like talk about them without getting into spoiler territory. But did the Star Destroyer shoot the tie? Is there an X-wing just off camera that we didn't see that shot the tie? There's this kind of like mystery, or it's like, oh, how did we get to that point? Just seeing that, even though, again, people, if people saw the behind the scenes reel that they showed at Comic-Con, like you saw the process of how that model of the busted up tie came into, went from model to sort of concept or digital, model to the shot. And so you sort of knew that was what happened to him, but, the specifics of that happening are still something that we have to see in the movie.
Yeah. Maybe it's evoking a kind of, if we throw in a little bit from the teaser that looks like there's some kind of situation where a TIE fighter starts shooting inside the hangar at its own people. And then, Finn takes his helmet off and there's blood on it and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then next, in the first teaser, we show that he arrives stunned and disorientated on the surface of Jakku in at least most of his stormtrooper armor. So, we could think, well, maybe at some point he gets into that thing as a de facto escape pod and, he deserts and he gets shot because the Imperials think he's trying to desert, or something has happened, some kind of awakening idea where it's like, I don't know. It's like, oh, there's some weird display of the Force or something like that. Mm-hmm. He awakens and people are like, something happens like this where he doesn't know how to control it and he escapes and he gets shot down, and basically the TIE fighter, inflamed, becomes a de facto escape pod. They think he's dead. Yeah. He pops out and heads towards wherever this town is. But I mean, obviously,
I think there's something to that. That's sort of where I was going in my head as well, because, and I don't know that I've seen anyone else point this out. It seems obvious to me. So maybe they haven't, I just haven't seen it, but so I think it's pretty clear that, Finn was in that TIE fighter that crashed on Jakku, but he's not wearing a TIE pilot's uniform. He's wearing just a regular Stormtrooper's uniform. And they've been issuing, 6-inch Black Series TIE fighter pilot, figures. And so, like, if he was a pilot, like, we would see him in that uniform. They would make sure that we have been exposed to that uniform and had seen it in other trailers and things. And so the implication is that he's not a pilot. And so I think that lends some credence to what we're talking about, which is, maybe he's not a pilot and he just kind of stole this TIE fighter.
Yeah. Kind of just hopped in
and didn't really know what he was doing and crashed. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, and it's something that I had thought about before, but I hadn't really. I knew, I was like, okay, there's something weird going on here, and I couldn't put my finger on it, and then I was just able to put my finger on it yesterday. So that was Finn. The first time we see Finn in this trailer. I mean, you said you weren't a huge fan of his dialogue.
Well, that dialogue just has that it's so indicative of this kind of this glut of young adult novels, like, you are the chosen one, or I don't know, I'm nobody, but you have the power along with you all along, that kind of idea. It just kind of sounded like a dystopian teen novel, like, I've got nothing to fight for. It's like, I'll give you something to fight for, that kind of thing.
Right.
And that makes me hope that, it's been recontextualized. It's not like or it's some kind of tone poem where they like literally, I have to telegraph this, they have to telegraph this information that Finn, for all intents and purposes, doesn't actually has never had true free will in his life, because he's just a tool of the Empire. Therefore, he's escaped, so he's literally a tabula rasa in this world where he has to just, like, I have to figure out how to, I know I need to get this stormtrooper outfit off of me. I know I need to, like, we assume that he steals a jacket or something, or, it's like the old thing where it's like, oh, he steals something off the clothesline. But who knows?
Yeah.
Well,
and going back to those tone poems that you were talking about for Phantom Menace, there's one I remember for Amidala, where it's Amidala sort of talking about being the Queen of Naboo and her people and everything. But the music behind it was actually what turned out to be a track. It's from when Qui-Gon makes the deal with Watto to, okay, if he wins the race, then I get Anakin. It's called Watto's Deal on the soundtrack, and it's not really related to Amidala at all, but they just thought, oh, this music sounds pretty good behind this dialogue. Let's put them together. And so, yeah, that's why I think, the dialogue here was probably pretty heavily edited and recontextualized in ways that when we see the movie, we're going to go, oh, I didn't realize the dialogue came from that scene.
Right.
So
now we go to Kylo Ren. Who's very kind of...
I am not sure that I will ever get used to that voice. That voice is still so weird to me.
Yeah.
And kind of, is this supposed to be menacing? Because I'm not feeling very menaced.
It's like Robo Jamie Gum.
Yeah. I wonder if that's sort of what he was going for.
Or was she like a great big fat Jedi?
Right.
Don't you hurt my little dog kind of thing. Yeah, Kylo Ren, his whole thing is kind of a mystery, and it's like I don't know what to feel like. Is he just going to be? Mm-hmm. Is he going to be the ultimate disappointment where it's just going to be like he's just cannon fodder for the story? It's like, well, he's just the guy. He's just the guy who wants something that's going to cause the story to move forward, and then when he wears out his welcome, he will quickly be dispensed. I just don't. Yeah, I don't get a sense of menace from him. I mean, I think he's supposed to be a bad guy. Don't get me wrong, but I don't like. He's not.
I will finish what you started.
Yeah. The kind of
right. It's almost like my impression of him is almost veering into Lorne Michaels territory because that's you're halfway there if you've got Lorne Michaels.
It's like in the music that kind of underpins that. For some reason, I kept thinking of Clockwork Orange.
Yeah,
that when that hit that sustained chord when Wendy Carlos hits, that's like boom. It kind of feels like that's sitting underneath of it.
Yeah,
the music, that's a whole nother thing. It's like
so I'll get in. We can get in the music once. Let's go through sort of like the images and then the dialogue, and then
he's got that. I like that his leather. You can see up close that he's wearing a leather mask. He's not evoking Darth Vader by wearing an armor.
Yeah, I had initially thought it was plastic. Or, this kind of like hard black plastic, but it turns out it's not, and that's sort of interesting.
And it's got dents and scratches in it, so he's obviously been in some kind of battle or something.
Yeah, he's worn it for a while. It's seen some use.
Yes,
which is different, right? And you think of the Darth Vader mask as this like glossy black, reflecting off all of this light. Yeah, it's a little different, and I like it too. It lends the costume a little more character, in a similar way that I thought those goggles at the beginning that we saw Rey wearing. You can see sort of the stitching all around the eyepieces. As if I found this thing and I need to reinforce them, so I'm just going to stitch them leather on them and help out that way. It just it gives it a little more character and. So I appreciated that. Like I think the costumes look really, really good.
Yes, definitely.
I think they did a great job.
Yeah. It's like that the Kylo Ren can't just go to the the Sith wannabe store and pick up something off the rack. He's got to, if he wants to commit to this, he's got to have to make this himself. I mean, either that or that this is the traditional garb of the Knights of Ren, and where the face mask or whatever denotes your position in the group or something, which we know nothing about the Knights of Ren whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I mean, you raised something, right? So we talked about Kylo Ren's voice. I mean, when we heard Rey say, I'm no one, she had this kind of, you said it was almost like a half English accent. It sounded close to Australian to me almost.
Australian accent kind of sounds half English accent to me.
Yeah. Right. So, this is dumb, and I acknowledge that this is dumb. This is a dumb reason, but her voice, her accent in this movie is why I'm still skeptical that Rey is Han and Leia's daughter, or even Luke's daughter, right? Because Leia had sort of a British clip to her voice in the beginning of A New Hope, but I just don't understand how they can make her, right? How they can say, like, okay, you have Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher who sound like they sound, and then they have a daughter who is British. And like, where would she have picked up that accent? And it's just, I guess with Luke, since we don't know if she's his daughter, like who her mother is, but right, again, it's like, how would we have gone from like Han and Leia and their accents to this like British lady?
So I have I actually have I'm not 100% like, oh, this is, and like, I don't think for this story to be successful that they have to be the parents or whatever.
No, I don't.
But I also have a long theory I came up with. Well, I'll try to shorten it, and it's a spoiler-ish thing. But so if you think about the expanded universe, like one of the thing about the early expanded universe books is there was always a subplot that the Empire wanted to get a hold of the kids and make them evil.
Right.
Let's steal the Jedi twins, or let's steal Princess Leia, take the kids, and raise them to be evil. And so one of the things that they ended up having to do in this version of the story is that the twins were always cloistered on some other planet, essentially not even being raised by the parents. It was like always a trusted, it was Winter. It was she was an Alderanian woman with silver hair that had, her whole thing was that she had a perfect memory or something.
Perfect memory, yeah.
And it became the subplot where it was like they could have Luke, Han and Leia go out and be star adventurers, and she wouldn't have to go, oh, I have to nurse. It was like that kind of thing where they sidestepped the responsibilities of being a mother and a father because the kid was always with the babysitters. And I almost wonder if this is how we're doing it, they're doing it. If these are the progeny or of Leia that they had to stash Rey on this planet that nobody would come looking for her, with somebody to keep an eye on her, and that would have influenced it. And the other thing is that we still haven't really heard much about Max von Sydow's character. Now, my theory is that if we're going to assume that somehow Rey is this progeny of the Skywalkers, that maybe Leia took her daughter and said, we have to assume that not every single person that was of Alderanian descent died when the Death Star. There must have been senators. There must have been dignitaries or something that escaped the death of the destruction of Alderaan. And Max von Sydow might be one of those people who he might be on the run too, because I'm sure the Empire didn't care much for people from Alderaan. Once they blew up their planet, they wouldn't necessarily want to keep along. So maybe he's simultaneous. I forget what his character's name was.
I can't remember what it was either. But he was like a village elder on Jakku who knew somehow where Luke's lightsaber was, I think. Yeah,
and maybe it's one of those things where it's like he set up shop down there and he's been kind of Rey's de facto person to watch, while he's watched over her since she was a child. And maybe he was a general in the army in Alderaan, or he was just a member of the rebellion. And, at the time he was 50 years old, and, he was older, but he says, I will take this on and I will go and live in exile and I will watch over your child to protect her from people that want to take her. And then, Max von Sydow's in his 80s now, and he's old, and he can't really do much fighting or whatever. And so it just becomes maybe she, and of course he's Swedish, and he has a Swedish accent when he speaks, but it could easily have been her vocal patterns could have easily been influenced by somebody else. And also, I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. There's just some lines which have been attributed to Princess Leia later on in the trailer, which, to my ear, evoke that half English accent thing that she pulls. That I expect your foul stench when I was brought on board. That kind of It's almost like she's gone back into that voice a little bit. That's the Leia voice. Whereas, like,
Could be.
you know, at the end of Jedi, she was pretty much just being Carrie. You know, she was a very, you know, she'd kind of dropped a lot of that kind of, in an Empire, she was, you know, very forceful and then, I mean, major speculation here. I don't know. You know, I might not even know. I might be so wrong. It's not even funny, but
yeah. Well, I mean, so talking about family and who's family, if that is even the case at all. So that leads to the sort of the next big moment of this trailer, which is, you know, bringing Han Solo into it.
Yeah.
And, you know, Rey says something like, "Oh, I've heard stories," and he's like, "They're all true. The dark side, the Jedi, all of it." How do you feel about that?
So,
like, even having to have that conversation, I guess.
Again, this is I mean, I'm getting into spoiler territory again, but I honestly feel this is a reconstruction, and it's all done out of context. You know, it's you know, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You know, the whole idea that we're like 50 to 60 years down the pike from the fall of the Jedi, kind of would make it all right, because then people like would grow up. It'd be like the idea of, like, you know, somebody would talk about what was it, like the World War I, like the Doughboys.
Right.
Like what's a doughboy? You know, like, you know, it's about a certain uniform. I think it was the English Army, wasn't it? Or somebody would war.
That sounds right.
In World War I, and it's like, you know, you could put a gun to my head. I couldn't tell you anything about what happened in World War I. I mean, I know that there was mustard gas and trench warfare, and it was, you know, a terrible war, and a lot more people died than any other war before. And it's like, well, that's all I really know about World War I. And I'm embarrassed to say, you know, I'm not proud of that, but it's kind of indicative how something, you know, 80, 90 years down the line, I'd have to go out of my way to look for it. And maybe they don't have the internet in the Star Wars galaxy. People, I can't just go buy a couple books and read up on it. And so that could indicative, like, okay, everybody, like, Rey's grown up not knowing anything about the Jedi, the Sith. Well, he doesn't mention the Sith. He says the dark side. Right. Or it could be or my theory is that, that not only, is this not a thing where, like, I'd never heard of the Jedi. I think it's more indicative of it's a hint about Luke Skywalker and why he is not an active participant in the story. That something happened, and it's been rumored, like, you know, that you guys won the battle.
Right. He went into seclusion for a reason.
It's like, yeah, you guys blew up the Death Star, and we thought the Empire was gone. And then we heard some rumor that Luke Skywalker, something happened, he took off, and it was some horrible thing happened. And then Han goes, "It happened. It's all true." You know, it's that thing where it's like, there's always been rumors that why did the rebellion kind of backslide? Why did they not push forward and create this, you know, like the expanded universe idea where it's like a new government and, you know, planets and new enemies. And it's like, no, we didn't quite, we kind of turfed out at the last minute. That's kind of what he's referring to. And because then because there's always been this implication I've talked about. There was two big spoiler ideas. That one, that there's some greater understanding about the saga that is going to be revealed. Something that's been kind of working in the background all this time that we don't know.
Make us rethink what we knew about the original trilogy.
And then the other thing, that something happened that made Luke decide rebuilding the Jedi Order was a bad idea, and that something happened. Either he had a family, and he realized that some reason why this is why Jedis don't have family, or he, you know, suffered injury from his battle with Palpatine, that, you know, that the end result wasn't immediately apparent at the end of Empire. Like, you know, maybe he had physical issues. Maybe he has been, you know, touched by the dark side, because, to be perfectly honest, if you think about Jedi, he had to tap into that anger to defeat Vader.
Yeah.
He had to go dark to take Vader's hand off. He used that energy. And it was it's very seductive. They say it's the easier, more seductive thing. Just because he came to a party and saw some ghosts and put his arm around someone, doesn't mean that he's not dealing with these demons. This idea that he's a de facto patricide, something that he completely was against when he went. He had that kind of Zen idea that
I will not fight you, Father.
Yeah, he kind of like, in some ways, his attitude that when he left Dagobah the first time, he had that cavalier attitude. I'm going to go there and I'm going to take this lightsaber. I'm going to shove it right up Darth Vader's ass. And then, he finds out, the story's a lot more complex. He loses his hand. He loses his nerve. Then he has to rebuild himself emotionally. And he comes at this idea that, like, we see these weird indicators in Jedi that he's like strangling people. He's killing animals. He's making threats. It's like, this is all very dark side type stuff. And then when we find out when he goes back to Dagobah, he has no intention. His whole intention is, I'm going to confront my father. I'm going to ask him to join me instead of wanting to join him back into the light, and I am willing to die to do this. And that's the attitude he went into. Then he goes in and he gets in a fight, and then he brings up his sister, who, he still has these complicated feelings for. It causes him, it's the same thing like his dad. He gets, like, you start threatening his family with anything, then he's much more susceptible, and then he gets angry and he starts fighting. So it's like, he might have some of this dark side in him that makes him, like, I have to go be off here, and I'm not training anybody, and that might be part of this. Again, this movie might have the redemption of Luke Skywalker a little bit. I don't mean he's a Sith Lord who is going to be, like, plotting the overtaking of the universe, but it's just this idea that Luke's damaged goods at this point.
Yeah, I mean, so this aspect of it, this idea that, like, the history has been lost and no one really knows of or believes in the Jedi anymore, like, that continues to bug me a lot. Just because, I mean, surely someone would have, like, built that in Aftermath. Sorry, I'm not talking very coherently. I'm putting my thoughts together. So, in Aftermath, we get Mon Mothma reestablishing, the New Republic, and she's the Chancellor now. You would think that she would want it, like, entered into the record, like, hey, by the way, you're the old Emperor and Darth Vader were Sith Lords, and they were using the Force for evil, and we should probably make a note of that. Now, whether they're clearly building this new canon where the facts themselves are in dispute, and you have an uprising. Governor, or I don't remember. Adelhart is even disputing that the Emperor is dead. So, like, I get that. I don't know. So, I mean, a couple possibilities could be that again in Aftermath, Mon Mothma talks about demilitarization, and she says, okay, now that I'm Chancellor, I'm getting rid of all these emergency powers, and we want to draw down the military forces. So it's possible that she just does away completely with the Jedi as a peacekeeping force, right? And that you still have, like, force sensitive people throughout the galaxy, but Luke isn't charged with creating a new Jedi Order the way that they set it up in the old EU. Or maybe he tried and it didn't work, or that both he and Mon Mothma just decided, like, what, this is probably a bad idea. This is what led to, the Emperor and Darth Vader in the first place. Let's just draw down a little bit.
Yeah, it's like the concept of, like a priest class, and
Right. I mean, the idea was that they were monks or this kind of priests or monk. They had these very simple robes. Even with that possibility, I would say that it should still be the case that there are people alive during the time of The Force Awakens who also were alive during the Clone Wars.
Oh, like Chewbacca.
Right? They might be right. They might be old or older, but who would know? And we've been told not even just by the original trilogy, but George Lucas and the Clone Wars and the prequel trilogy, right? There were thousands of Jedi spread throughout the galaxy. I would imagine people would have seen and heard of these people and said oh yeah, there were Jedi and they had lightsabers and they could move stuff with their mind, right? Even if it's as basic as that,
right?
The other theory then is again this idea that the dialogue and the images have been edited so that have been recontextualized, which is that maybe Han's just talking to Finn, and because Finn spent his whole life up to this point in the First Order as a stormtrooper, and he had heard one version of the story, and then he was presented with a different version of the story, and Han telling him look, it's all true. What you were told isn't the whole story, that there's this dark side to the Force, and there were Jedi who opposed the dark side, and that's how we ended up where we are today. That it's not necessarily Rey asking Han for her benefit, even though she starts out by saying oh, I've heard stories, maybe that line's from a different scene, or even she's there to sort of help prod Han. Maybe Han's saying all that for Finn's benefit and not necessarily Rey's, which would make it I think a little more palatable for me anyway, and probably I would think a lot of more casual fans were wait, what do you mean they don't know who the Jedi are? The Jedi were a big part of everything. So that's the other option that I might suggest is as a possibility as what's behind that dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, and I almost think that it's the resignation in Han's face when he says it. There's no. Mm-hmm. It's not it's almost not like he doesn't have. I mean, obviously, I don't know the context of the conversation, but the circumstances. I mean, it's. I just think it's he's not looking wistfully back. Remember the time I saved my girlfriend and we were in a trash compactor, that kind of. He's not thinking about that stuff. And it's right. And really, it. Yeah, if Han would have memories would have at least some memories of Jedi, if he was on Corellia or whatever. There must have been Jedi on Corellia. There must have been stories about him, so he would know about it. I just think it's just, this is evocative to something that, some kind of rumor about how the old gang broke up kind of idea, It's
right.
I thought you guys all used to do stuff together. Because there's that inference in Aftermath that, that Han and Chewie went off to Kashyyyk and have been, trying to liberate Kashyyyk for a long time. I mean, it's
right.
It's this idea that, the sadness of it is the idea that instead of it being the expanded universe where it's they have to come, there's actually sequences in the book where they have to come up with where Chewie tries to help Han and Leia have date night or whatever,
Right.
Where he makes up a bed for him and then leaves the Falcon or something. To the the fact is that the responsibilities, it's kind of like that old idea of the great English novel where it's I'd love to spend time with you, but my responsibilities, I have to go back and fight the war. That kind of idea. Yeah. Where they never quite got together. And
I wonder if they're sort of leading to that or alluding to that in Shattered Empire, which we'll talk about maybe next week.
Yeah.
But Shattered Empire is really about this pilot, this A-Wing pilot, Shara Bay, who has a husband, I guess. I can't remember if they're actually married.
She says husband, yes.
Okay, so Kes, Dameron, and they have a son named Poe, and guess who's in The Force Awakens?
Exactly.
Right, but, she's an A-Wing pilot, flying missions. He is a ground troop who's fighting with Han Solo, right? So he was there at Endor to help take down that shield generator, and then Han basically takes all of those same people to different planets to run similar missions. And so, Shara and Kes don't have a lot of time together during that period. But that also means, if Han is off, leading those missions, that also means that he is not spending a lot of time with Leia. And as you say in Aftermath too, which I guess takes place not long after Shattered Empire, if he and Chewie go off to Kashyyyk, who knows how long they're on Kashyyyk. The second book in the series is called Life Debt, which refers to the Wookiee life debt. So I assume we'll learn more about it in the second book of Aftermath, the Aftermath trilogy. But yeah, so that's possible. We can talk about that a little bit later too when we get to the shot of the two of them.
Yeah.
But the next bit of the trailer is the Millennium Falcon jumping to and traveling through hyperspace. And you made the point that the prequels really didn't show enough of this kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is kind of dumb, right? This is sort of along the lines of my theory about Rey and her parentage. But even more so because this is, for some reason, the camera angle of this shot kind of bugged me. Because it's almost like the Falcon jumps to light speed and is traveling sort of towards the camera, and then it passes up the camera, and the camera like follows it through light speed the rest of the way. In the original trilogy, and maybe the prequels, because as you said, they don't really show a lot of ships in hyperspace in the prequels, but at least in the original trilogy, when they show the Falcon or any other ship going to hyperspace, it's usually either shown from within the cockpit, so you're there experiencing the jump to light speed with everyone else, or the camera is put sort of in front of where the ships are as they're coming out of light speed. Or so I'm thinking of Return of the Jedi, right? When the Rebel fleet jumps to light speed, the camera is sort of placed in the back behind a lot of these ships, watching them jump to hyperspace, and then the camera is there then waiting at Endor, and then all the ships sort of reappear in front of the camera. Right. And that, I guess, George Lucas always sort of claimed to have more of kind of like a documentary style of shooting and of where to put the camera and everything. And for me, at least, it gave me kind of a better sense of experiencing this jump to hyperspace. When you are, in A New Hope, when you're there in the cockpit, like Luke is the audience surrogate. You're right there with Luke, like, oh wow, we are jumping to light speed. Like, this is amazing. So with the shot from the trailer, that with the way that Abrams did it, like, where's the camera? Like, who is observing the Millennium Falcon in hyperspace, if that's even a thing? And I recognize that that's like a dumb quibble to have with it, and I think it's just that I need to just, even though we've had 4 different directors for these Star Wars movies, it's really sort of one guy's philosophy about how to shoot these things and where to put the camera and how to set up the shot. And so I need to start, even though I already have with like the dog fights and everything, I just need to reset my expectations for like how these things are actually going to look, like what the shots are going to look like, how they're going to be set up, what the blocking is going to be, the movement through the frame, everything like that, which again seems like sort of a minor technical quibble, but like that, at least to me, that has a lot to do with how these movies feel and how we experience movies in general, but particularly a movie like a Star Wars movie. And so it's not that I didn't like it. It's just, it was sort of, my feelings about it were just a reminder that like, oh, right, I need to sort of reset my expectations for what these might look like and how they might feel kinetically as I watch them. Yeah,
it's the idea where it's like, well, do you want the feel or do you want the look? And I know that sounds like that doesn't make sense, but it's the idea that I think they have to goose the action. They have to make it more like you think it is than the way it really was. Because really, if you go back and people go, I want it just like Star Wars. I want it just like the first Star Wars. Because it's the first thing in a new trilogy. I want that style. But then it's like, well, there's no way they're going to have 20 minutes of droids farting around in the desert and having it be like
right.
Like, and they're like, oh, then I get stolen, then I get bought, and then we watch two droids get stolen in two different scenarios. Then we watch the droids get sold, then the droids get cleaned, then the droids disappear, then the droids get found, and it's like, oh my god, this is taking forever. I think they have to bring that emotion, but they can't do it using the same like long tracking shots and the idea of like, even Lucas, he tossed so many of his, like, when he would cut from one scene to the other, the dissolves, he completely changed his minds about dissolves over time. He would take them out. Whereas in the early version, it's like, oh, you pick up this and all of a sudden it's like, wait, it's like a circular dissolve or it's a shift to thing dissolve. And then like over time he decided that, oh, I don't like those anymore. So as they're released on Blu-ray, all of a sudden those things aren't there anymore. And I think the idea of having to step back from that, documentary style was, people didn't really say, oh, man, one thing I love about Star Wars is it was really done in a documentary style. I think it was just a matter of, this is the technology. We have to have a static camera because I have to do this pass 5 times with the computer to get it to expose. And I think now that they're like, but because of their 1977 brains or whatever, or later on, of course, it's like the technique evokes so much emotion or the idea of forward movement that if you watch it now compared to like watching like say the Hulkbuster fight in the last Avengers film, it's like it's like the glacial pace. It's just, I think that modern viewers they'd be like, oh man, it's like you have this whole universe and you're shooting the Millennium Falcon from behind, it's just, or you're just, everything is through the cockpit. That idea that I think they have to evoke the emotion but they can't use the old tools. And I think it's like,
and so we can jump ahead a little bit to the shots of the dogfights and particularly where you're saying, it's in the atmosphere. There's this fight going on in the atmosphere of some planet. And you have the X-Wings going after TIE fighters. You have, the Millennium Falcon being chased by TIE fighters, or, later in the trailer, there's the dogfight, or, there's the big battle between the X-Wings and the TIE fighters, and you have the Millennium Falcon in there, and you have all these really cool camera moves of, going down and around and following ships and or staying static and letting the ships kind of move back and forth. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that back, I can't remember if it's episode 2 or 3, they did those webisodes and sort of mini, DVD extras, but before they put the DVDs out.
Right.
Where they're talking about the shift to going digital. And there was some, I don't even know if they were affiliated with the movie. They might have been, a camera operator, someone on the technical side was sort of complaining that, with the digital camera, they had to have the cables like wired into a computer or wired into the screen or something. And so it made the camera more static. And they're saying, look, we spent decades trying to free up the camera so that we could do all these different movements with it. And George Lucas is included in that, and the things that he and ILM did with the original trilogy is, they spent all this time trying to free up the camera, and now that we're back in digital, we've locked it back in place because we have to keep these wires plugged in. And so this, the shots that we've seen of the dogfights, it feels like Star Wars is going back to freeing up the camera and having more movement. Because even in the prequels, I want to say that they freed up the camera a bit with the what is it called? The Clone War, the Battle of Geonosis, and then the different other kind of ship battles. But a lot of that was either sort of horizontal, or kind of going back and forth, closer to camera or further away from camera. Or occasionally you had sort of that vertical movement, but you didn't ever have like multiple of those, you didn't have very much of all three of those going on at once, or even two of those going on at once. And there's that shot of the Millennium Falcon where it flies down off that ridge or off of that wreckage, and then there's a split second where it just looks like it's floating, like a bird has caught the wind and it's just kind of like floating just for a second before it accelerates again. Like that looks so good to me, and I think that gets to what you're talking about of freeing up the camera and a documentary style. Like, you can't do a shot like that and it's just going to look static and boring to contemporary audiences, right? They have different expectations for how those kinds of sequences should look.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also a matter of the time. If you think about, like, say, the Battle of Geonosis, when the clones arrive, there was a lot of that kind of, all of a sudden, that was the year that digital zoom was super popular. Where it was, George shot that, well, I mean, he didn't shoot it because it was all in a computer, because none of it was practical. It was like, literally, there's no actor, so it was all CG. So they'd have that feel. It would be like you'd be a trooper standing on a ridge with binoculars, and then you would zoom in on the inside of the cockpit of one of these clone trooper tanks and zoom out, and it would zoom to something else. I mean, that was like that year. That was the year that, it got used a lot in that Joss Whedon's Serenity. That was on the TV show that they would do those weird digital zoom ins on the ships. Like, they would kind of like be a far thing and be like a blip in space, and then they would zoom in on it. That kind of stuff. I mean, that was all very 10 years ago. So now it's kind of like, that's how they tried to, and that was actually more jarring than some of the stuff I'm seeing in this trailer. You know what I mean? That felt, even though I liked it, it felt less Star Wars. It didn't. Yeah. It didn't. It's all about I guess it's all about forward motion. It's all. I mean, right. I don't know the language of film like I should, but it always feels like Star Wars when it's best. It's just pushing forward. It's pushing forward. It's like that constant. It's like that juggernaut of action. So then all of a sudden, when they start to do the denouement at the end, you're like, wait a second, I'm going 1,000 miles an hour here, and we're ending this, and then you want more, And I think that's what at least that's what I hope they're doing. I just looked at the clip you were talking about while you were talking about it, and it's like it's like it floats like a butterfly, and then it just speeds up again. It's like almost It's I don't know. It's very exciting, in my opinion. I agree. It's like the Star Wars. It's kind of like we've gotten to the point where now it looks like it looks like what I was in my head, what I was playing, Oh, jeez.
So those are kind of the aerial shots, or the shots of the ships flying around. Was there anything else you wanted to say about those?
Oh, where's my? Did I have something else on my notes?
So after the Falcon in hyperspace, Knights of Ren, and then Poe meeting Finn.
Okay, yeah.
Or the Knights of Rain, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I know there was a big disagreement on one of our brother podcasts last night about whether they were dark troopers of some type or they were Knights of Ren, and their argument was that they are Knights of Ren. That's his group. That's his posse. Well, you couldn't quite see their faces, but their helmets looked very similar to his, and so I just assumed it was sort of a piece that they were. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that's like he's got a bunch of dudes with him, because I always assumed that he was just kind of on. He was kind of like on loan or something like that.
Right. Well, and what was interesting is that he's the only one there with what was it called? The plasma sword.
Plasma sword
on the book. Right. Everyone else has like clubs or guns. He's the only one that has plasma sword. So that's sort of interesting.
It'll be interesting how he acts around his buddies. If he's their leader or whatever. Is he the Vincent Chase of the Knights of Ren? And it's basically the Star Wars version of Entourage. Well, there'll be like one guy's like, "Yo, Kylo, we got to go back to New York and get some sandwiches." It's like, all you talk about is Darth Vader, man. It's like you're losing yourself. No, I will finish what he
There's
started.
There's always that one knight who's like, I don't know, guys. Maybe maybe this isn't the fight we want.
Yeah,
we're in trouble.
I don't know that those rebels, they got some nice girls. We can meet some nice girls or something. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Let's go get some malts.
Let's go get some frosty malts. Yeah, I mean the Knights of Ren. That's such an unknown quantity. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't even really want to speak to it because I haven't really.
We've been talking a lot.
We've been talking a lot, and I don't have a lot to say about it.
Yeah.
So then we go to was it Poe meeting?
Yeah. So Poe meeting Finn, or at least, sort of
acknowledging.
Poe gets out of the X-wing. They pats him on the shoulder or whatever.
I understand that they had to show Oscar Isaac because the only other shot which we forgot to mention is the supposed interrogation scene, which we know from the behind the scenes that Poe Dameron is captured at least at some point. Obviously, this is an interrogation. Now we don't know if it's still. We haven't seen any explicit displays of force sensitivity. Yes, Poe Dameron has Kylo Ren's hand in his face, but that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, if he's doing like the old, if he's doing a quote mind meld, which is like, wait a second, or he went into the supply closet on the Star Destroyer and said, "Hey, what's this droid here? This ball-shaped droid with all the needles coming out of it? Oh, that's our interrogation droid." So they might be, he might be shot. They might actually show like, the stuff that was only shown in the radio drama, which was very strange. If you ever need a weird diversion, go and listen to the original radio drama's version of the Leia interrogation scene. It's a sound to be heard. So he's being interrogated and he has some kind of vision. So we don't know if this is, Kylo Ren is putting the vision of this is what the Starkiller base can do, or he's remembering that it's been done, or he's threatening to do it using either the Force or he's using, some kind of interrogation drug or something. I mean, it could, again, it's an unknown quantity.
Right.
But the thing about the Poe Dameron Finn thing was it kind of blunts the feeling of anxiety and peril for Poe Dameron, even if they're showing it out of sequence, like, let's say Poe Dameron gets captured after he does the shoulder slug to Finn. It doesn't really matter because this is what they're presenting in the trailer. That it diminishes because you already know he's out of danger. At least in the reality of the trailer, your mind first you're like, ooh, Poe Dameron, he's in peril. And then 30 seconds later, he's like slapping him in the side and saying, "Hey, you're here." And it's like, well, okay, so we know that, and it also kind of blunts the idea of what Finn says about I've got nothing to fight for, and they're like, "Oh, here you got something to fight for," and it's like, well, don't ask the question in the trailer and then answer it.
I was okay with it because I mean it's the pat on his shoulder or whatever is sort of like welcome to the good guys now, and I think showing that. I mean, knowing that there are 2 more movies after this, right? We don't know how it'll end up, and maybe he'll stumble along the way. But it's showing him sort of finding or maybe thinking he's found a place for himself after he wasn't sure what to do. Like I think that's fine, and that adds to the emotion of it, and that's what gets people like, oh my god, I love what they're doing with Finn. Like,
it almost makes me wonder if Finn's role is actually not as crucial to the story as we thought, and that in some ways he is the lens in which we view this movie. You know what I mean? He is Finn is the viewer.
He's the audience surrogate.
And there's no better way to he starts out with the Empire, ends up with the First Order, and ends with the Resistance, and that way we get to kind of see everything through the eyes of a single person. But I'm obviously heavily speculating. I mean, I don't know. It's just it's just the idea that this connection between 2 characters that I don't know of. I'm like, am I supposed to care that they're buddies?
Right.
You know what I mean? That's where I kind of was like, It's like we assumed he was going to join the good side because that's they're
Right.
selling that figure as him being kind of the good guy.
Yeah. Well, and that's right. So it's interesting. We definitely know that Finn and Rey have interactions together, and we've seen a couple of brief interactions between Poe and Finn now, but we haven't seen anything between like Poe and Rey, or we've seen Kylo Ren fighting Finn, and now we've seen him interacting with Poe, and do he and Rey like ever interact? Right, there are all these different kind of binary relationships that we still don't know if like they even come up, or how they combine all these characters in different ways to move the story forward.
Yeah, and if you look really close in that shot, you can see the rumored new protocol droid.
Oh yeah. And I think also, so P or she, I guess, because PZ I think is a female droid, or a female identified droid. How about that? Is behind Poe, and then I think behind Finn you might be able to see Elo Asti, Bullhead, in the long yellow coat. I think that's the same character. I don't know why he's wearing a long yellow coat over his pilot's uniform, but maybe we'll find out.
Maybe he's got flippers or something.
Mm-hmm. So we get more dogfights. We get the X-wing going after the TIE fighter we talked about, and then we get to what I think a lot of people are assuming is Maz Kanata's castle, with all of the banners, the colorful banners out front, and that kind of red droid walking around, and it's Han and Finn and Rey,
right,
who show up there. And
that somebody people posted some screenshots that you can see the Mandalorian Death Head flag, which might be it might just be an Easter egg. I don't.
Well, someone else went through and is trying to identify all of the banners, and so there's that one. There's I didn't even know about this one because I guess I'm not a true Star Wars fan, but the Boba Fett wheat symbol. Did you know about this? On the Boba Fett uniform or armor or whatever, there's like this little wheat thing with a lowercase cursive F, and so there's apparently that banner or flag is outside, and then there are at least 4 or 5 or 6 of the pod racing flags from Episode 1, including Sebulba's and Anakin's.
Oh wow!
And so, I have a feeling that these are just like, hey, we want some colorful flags in there. Let's make a bunch of references to previous Star Wars movies. I don't think they have any particular meaning. Some people are like, oh, maybe Boba Fett's in this movie. I don't think so.
Somebody was saying on the thing, oh, it's Boba Fett's castle. It's Boba Fett's, like, his lair. And I'm like, no, it's not.
I doubt it. Yeah.
It's not. That's just, I'm watching a loop of it. And it's, my eyes are too bad, and I haven't gotten it's hard to get high resolution photos off this because everything is so compressed these days. When you finally like, I'll watch the trailer and then halfway through it's like, oh, it'll go back to standard def, and then I have to So there's some talk that this big red droid is actually another practical thing, although it looks, because they'd seen it on set, but man, it looks CGI to me. But good on them if they got a practical effect out of there.
Yeah,
I'm excited to find out what's going to go on in there, but I don't have any grand theories except for that Maz Kanata is kind of filled the vacuum that occurred after Jabba the Hutt died. So it's kind of that's kind of where it begins and ends. I think she's just a way to get information going, But I could be wrong. She could be like she could be a new ally that we've never heard of,
Yeah. I mean, this was probably my favorite moment in the whole trailer, was that shot. I mean, you had all the because it's not that there hadn't been color in it, but we've seen a lot of like greens and grays and silvers and blacks and reds. But having all of the different colors of those flags, was really, it was like they popped in a way. That,
I mean, it's definitely
maybe if they had been
It's evocative.
Like the juxtaposition of those coming after the previous shot, they popped in a really nice way.
It makes me think of like base camp when people go and climb Everest, and there's all those flags and stuff like that. It's kind of nice yellows and reds and stuff that. Even though I don't think this is on a mountain, but it kind of is. It is very evocative of that.
Mm-hmm. And that droid that you mentioned, the kind of big red droid walking away, I think that was great. I liked that design. I thought it was really interesting, and the other part of that moment I liked was, Finn is, he kind of like looks back at the droid as he walks past it, like, what is where am I? What is this thing? And it gives you that other sense of, Finn is still sort of stepping in, he's crossing the threshold. He's stepping into this larger world, this larger universe that he's not totally familiar with. And then, both of those elements, like the banners and the castle and then the droid are things that we haven't seen in Star Wars before either. And it's, having those really cool shots of like X-Wings fighting TIE fighters, like those look great too, but we've sort of seen, that basic idea is very familiar to people who've seen Star Wars before, whereas, and droids are certainly familiar, but like that kind of droid and that color, like a droid that red color, or everything else, like that's what is piquing my curiosity for this movie more than like, oh, I want to see X-Wings fighting TIE fighters.
Yeah, I mean, we don't. That's the thing. It's like Finn. It's like it's all. It supports that whole like, oh, where the like the story's true kind of thing, because we don't know where Rey and Finn. It's like she's been living in the desert. For all we know, literally, he could have been a glorified space janitor. You know what I mean? He could have He could have grown up and never left, Starkiller Base or the Star Destroyer that he's been on. I mean, he maybe never gone on the surface of a planet. It's like it's that idea where it's like these stormtroopers, because he implies he was bred to do one thing and then he doesn't really know how to do anything else. Almost like they don't clone people anymore, but they take people and raise them like clones.
Right.
Then we go to, I guess the shot of Luke's hand, which we assume is his hand.
Yeah, I'm still skeptical that is Luke. I'm probably the last person who is skeptical that that's Luke. And again, it's kind of a dumb reason, but how did the synthetic flesh on his hand melt to the point where he has those metallic fingers? Because we've never seen those on Luke before. And yeah, he had a black glove on during Jedi, but I just assumed that was to cover up the part on his wrist where he got shot at Jabba's sail barge, and you never saw like the rest of his hand fall off or anything. Yeah, so the fact that now suddenly, and now maybe that's not at Endor, right? That's the other option, that's somewhere else. But the idea that is Luke now, it's like, well, then what happened to his hand to get to that point where he's just not. I mean, maybe if he secluded himself, he doesn't have access to the best equipment, and the synthetic flesh just falls off, and he just goes with it. But I don't know. That's the only reason I'm like, well, maybe that's Luke. Maybe it's not.
Yeah, that's the kind of yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe they tried it, thought about doing it with the black glove or something, and that was the only way they could telegraph that was Luke. Well, Luke's got who has who has a mechanical hand in this? And it's like Luke. Yeah, or it could be like say it could be another thing. I mean, it's the idea that it's the plot is the A story or whatever, or the B story. I don't even know because I haven't seen it. Is the search for Luke Skywalker. I think I think they're just doing everything they can to keep him out of, let you know that he's going to be part of the story, but doing everything they can to kind of like resist the urge to actually use him. They want to keep that reveal to the movie. I mean, yeah, we've all seen it, blah blah blah, but I think that is a very JJ thing. Like, no, I don't want to show him. I don't want to show his face. I don't want him on the poster. It's like, even though, because there are going to be people that didn't go on makingstarwars.net or Badass Digest or clickbait and look at this or follow Luke Mark Hamill on Instagram and see his beard. I mean, there's people that they're just going to be showing up, and this is, they maybe seen the trailer, but that's about it. That's all they know about this. So,
right.
and maybe if it's worth it to get, if you can get that percentage of people, which could be 60% of the people, and it's worth it. It's worth it to
good.
It's worth it to hold back and have a big reveal.
Yeah.
So,
and then after that we get a quick shot of Captain Phasma,
and that's
as you say in the background, you have two troopers that are just literally tossing some guy out of a tent.
They're pricks. I mean, the First Order, they're not your daddy stormtrooper. They're not just sticking guns in your face and hitting their heads on doors. They're assholes. They're like chucking people. They're shoving people. It's like, they're pissed off. It's that kind of idea where it's like, well,
they're a little more ruthless, maybe.
Yeah. Makes you wonder. Makes you wonder if that we will be getting a PG-13, but that's for a whole nother shot. So then
the last thing with that shot is we see that landing ship kind of landing and its wings just moving ever so slightly. I really want to see what that ship looks like when its wings aren't folded up in the upright position, because even the toys that have come out.
They don't move.
They don't move, and they're just completely upright. And I was like, surely this isn't how they like fly and travel through space. And it sure enough, it looks like they move much like the old shuttle.
It's like they look like a Doritos 3D flying through space.
Yeah, right. So I really want to know like what is the silhouette of that thing when its wings are not in that upright position.
And so and the next shot is tears. I call it the Tears of Rey. Something
like tears
of Rey. An 8-part series on Tear.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
Exactly. Well, she's obviously pretty busted up about something. I mean, it's I mean, she looks like she's in the snow. I'm kind of thinking this might be connected to the Finn lightsaber reveal, the Kylo Ren blunt saber reveal, and I honestly, she looks like she is kind of hovering over Finn's brown quilted jacket.
Yeah,
that perhaps maybe he goes up against Kylo Ren and gets either he's either killed. Which would be really weird to put I
don't think he gets killed because other actresses for Episode 8 have been reading with him. So.
Okay, so
that's a spoiler, but that's a spoiler.
Maybe he gets stabbed. Maybe he gets like I said, it's not Star Wars.
He could get hurt, certainly.
Yeah, it's not Star Wars if someone doesn't get dismembered at some point. And so maybe he'll have a mechanical hand or something, or maybe if Kylo Ren punches him in the face and he's just knocked out or something. I mean, it doesn't mean he's dead for sure, but it's a very there's some real peril going on here.
Yeah. Now, so the jacket, we've seen it on Poe as well in that behind the scenes thing when we saw a stormtrooper marching him down the hall. He was wearing that jacket. So.
But we also know
we certainly identify it with Finn more because we've seen him in the jacket more often.
We also know he's been signed on he's also on for the next movie too.
Right. And then the other thing is, right, so that jacket, it's sort of in the left foreground. In the right foreground, I mean, it's not in focus, so it's hard to see. But am I crazy? Or does that kind of look like fur and maybe a bandolier like the one that Chewbacca wears?
Oh, don't even tell me that.
And I don't necessarily mean that to say that like Chewbacca dies, because he doesn't have to, right? We talked about this with Han last week. Like, he doesn't have to die. He could just go away. But, he what if he's there? What if he is there and is injured in the fight? Who else could be there, right? We've seen Finn and Kylo Ren facing off. Rey, the implication is that she's there. Like, who else could be there? It could be a big group of them,
right?
And then the other, I mean, again, I don't mean to imply that Chewbacca has to die, but Peter Mayhew can't keep making these movies forever, you know, and they're gonna have to find a way to sort of not push him aside, but sort of step down his roles in these movies, similar to, I guess, what they've been doing with Kenny Baker, like we've been talking about earlier. But, you know, it either by just asking less of that character, and because we don't even, you know, we've seen Chewbacca sort of standing and sitting, but we don't really know how much running around he does in this movie. I can't imagine it's very much. And if it is, then it's a stuntman, right? But, you know, they have to find some way to kind of like, okay, it's that character. We'll give him a nice send off. Not necessarily going to kill him off, but just, you know, he's not going to be a big part of these movies anymore. And maybe that
can't they just
maybe this is part of it. And I can't tell if it's like strands of fur sticking up or if it's, you know, branches or grasses from, you know, the surrounding environment. It's like I said, it's out of focus and it's hard to see.
I looked at it again and I can't say for sure either.
But it's a big mound of something there.
No offense to Peter Mayhew, but can't they just recast? they can't find a tall. Is it Doug Jones doesn't want to play Chewbacca?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's I don't know. I don't really want to have to deal with Chewbacca dying, so that's my thing.
Right.
It's like I think people still bear the scars of Chewbacca dying in Vector Prime, a minor book that the mere fact that he dies, even though that's a pretty interesting book because it's a weird book. It's very different than a lot of the Star Wars novels. The fact that Chewie died and it was just like so heavy. It was like I just didn't feel the interest in reading any of the other books. It was like, well, if this is the kind of stuff we're gonna do, it doesn't all have to be realistic. Like not every hero has to die. Sometimes you can just be like, you know, at the last minute, like, I guess I was going to be late for dinner as they crawl out of the wreckage of a exploding, you know, jet.
Right.
I do love that the shot of them with their hands up or whatever. The next shot, Chewie's got a bandage on, which, you know, here's the great thing. Like I had seen Return of the Jedi, like, you know, 50 times and never realized that Chewie had been actually shot during the battle of the Jabba's sail barge, and that they have the conversations like she goes, "Chewie, you've been hit," or something like that. And I'm like, for some reason, because of, you know, VHS and mono televisions and pan and scan things, I didn't actually make the connection that Chewie had been wounded until years later when I heard a description of the deleted sandstorm scene where I guess Chewie's supposed to be limping in it or something, and I'm like, what? And then I watched it again. I'm like, oh, he got shot. So I don't know. My point is, I mean, there was some rumor going around. Maybe it was some early production photo that Chewbacca had been maimed at some point during the battle, and he had like he had a mechanical arm or something like that. But I wonder if this is where that came from, or it was an idea that was kicked around that they decided not to do. They didn't want to make him look too weird, and they didn't want to have to add a bunch of, you know, even though Charlize Theron in the Mad Max movie, like the CGI of her arm is amazing. It's like maybe they didn't want to have to deal with that and just like, his scars will be emotional.
Yeah.
So there's another shot of BB-8 in an X-wing. So I guess that he's hanging out with Poe.
I think it's Poe's X-wing. Yeah.
And there's been some talk that maybe that's part of the connection, that BB-8 was actually always Poe's droid, and for some reason that's the ship, you know, and there's a battle above Jakku, and the droid ends, you know, Poe Dameron gets captured, and somehow BB-8 ends up on Jakku, and so it's not like BB-8 has been somebody with Rey this whole time. It was a relative. BB-8 ends up being something that she discovers in her searching of this Star Destroyer. Or something
and I read that too, and that's fine. You know, I don't care whose droid it is. I have a feeling though that regardless of whose droid that was initially, that BB-8 becomes sort of protective of Rey and kind of clings to Rey, much in the same way that R2 became very protective of Luke. And, Luke always kept R2 around, that, except for maybe sending BB-8 out in these X-Wings, that, Rey kind of keeps it around her, for safekeeping in a way.
Right.
And from here we get sort of a rapid succession.
Yes,
I guess that's also part of the rapid succession of images.
Yes,
that kind of closes out.
And there's that voice. What's that voice say? Something. Now I should have wrote it down. Which
the force is calling to you. Let it in.
Yeah. Now, do you think that's Carrie Fisher?
I could see it being Carrie Fisher. I could see it being Lupita Nyong'o. I could see it being Rey. Again, maybe from a different scene or, edited in some way, because it doesn't sound too dissimilar to the first two voices to me. So yeah, I could see that being any number of characters. And I have a feeling that people will actually be surprised when it pops up in the movie, either from who's speaking it or who it's being spoken to. The context will be different than a lot of people think.
Yeah, and then there's I don't have all the shots written down. Then there's a shot of the
Star Destroyer bridge is blowing up, and the mouse droid is steering away. There's
Starkiller base, which if you look real close at that image, there's actually something. The ground is mechanically opening up.
Yeah, there's like a trench.
Yeah, and it's like. It kind of, I guess that's the big reveal that Starkiller Base is, it's a planet. It's a space station. It's a space station planet.
I mean, the only thing that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is like, okay, so if it is the planet, if they turn this planet into a weapon, like how does it move around? How does it threaten other planets in other star systems other than just whatever it's next to? Right? Like how do they build a hyperdrive into a planet? 'Cause, with the Death Star, since you're starting from scratch, you can just sort of like, and it's the whole thing is constructed, so it's just a ship. It's just shaped like a planet. But when it's a planet, like that's a much different enterprise of figuring out, okay, if we're hollowing out this planet, put this laser in, we also need to figure out like the mass and how, we need all of this massive hyperdrive to get it through space, and like how does that work? So that aspect of it is why I'm still like, really, the planet itself is the thing? Well, like it just doesn't seem that practical.
Yeah, that might be one of the eye-rolling things. I mean, I'm eye-rolling already, the idea of essentially another Death Star. It's like, is that really all Star Wars is? It's like someone says, oh, yeah. it's a show about, it's a movie about... I mean,
for Jedi, Lucas wanted 2 Death Stars.
Right.
So...
It's just like, you get a Death Star.
So maybe that is all it is.
That's all Star Wars really is. It's just a series of Death Stars. It's like, they keep making them, and we keep blowing them up. That's Star Wars.
Yeah.
That might be the one. That might be the one thing, and the one problem that like kind of might be one of the things that people walk out of the theater going, "Ugh, another Death Star." But that's just my thing. And then there's that shot of Han and Leia embracing, and there's some feels like some real pain on Carrie Fisher's face. It's just kind of like it just makes me think that like those kids didn't get the relationship that they really wanted. Their lives did not get easier after that Ewok battle. It's kind of like it just became 30 years of like endless toil and diplomacy and fighting and never taking a quote vacation or whatever. I mean, but I'm reading a lot into a half a second shot. But
no, yeah, but I mean, I really think that is their relationship is in a lot of ways the key to the whole story from here on out. In the rest of this trilogy and what they do in the books and the comics and everything is right, because there are a bunch of questions whether you think that some of these newer characters are their child or children or not, right? Okay, so this embrace, it means they were separated at some point, either long term or not, right? At the very least, Han was separated from the Millennium Falcon because there's that thing where it goes, Chewie, we're home, right? So why was Han separated from the Millennium Falcon? How did that happen?
But you know something, he could easily be saying that when they get back to that base. And he's
he's looking out the window.
I was watching because after the trailer, it's like I threw on A New Hope, and I was trying to get the geometry of those ridge of lights, or some people, because Chewie's got a gun. I mean, it might be it might honestly been a manufactured shot for the trailer. You know, I don't know,
maybe.
But that's like, they could be like, Chewie, we're home, and then they crawl out, and then, because there's like, maybe there's nobody there, and then he lands, he goes, Chewie, we're home, and then they open up, and Chewie's got his gun out, because he's like, where is everybody? And then all of a sudden, all the rebels come out and go, hey! I don't know. I'm speculating heavily.
So home may not be the Millennium Falcon.
I mean, I like the idea that he has to get the Falcon back. I mean, it's...
Right, and we have seen in that behind the scenes, we saw Daisy Ridley in the rig for the Falcon cockpit, just like by herself and like frantically like pushing buttons, and the thing is like swinging around wildly. So
yeah, she gets to pilot.
There's at least a suggestion that she is piloting this thing at one point by herself, and then I think there's also another shot I remember.
There's a trading car. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was going to say she's in the pilot's seat. She's in Han's old seat, and Chewie is in. Oh, it's also in that. I think the behind the scenes thing where, she's sitting next to Peter Mayhew, and she's like looking. Peter Mayhew's talking, and she's just like looking over the script or something. But Harrison Ford's not. Whether that means that he's not in that scene at all, or if he was just in his trailer or whatever, who knows? But right and. So if they are parents to any of these new characters, why were they estranged? And we talked about that already. But I mean, the last big kind of question I still have about this whole Enterprise is, right, if the Force has awakened 30 years after Endor, if now we're getting this, this idea that the Jedi weren't around and that the idea of the Force is like very foreign to people, what has Leia been doing for the last 30 years? And, the Force is strong, in that family, and she can use the Force, but has she? Maybe she wasn't. And if she was, I mean, the books, the old EU books always made it seem like her powers are much more limited than Luke's.
Right.
Either because she never developed them or just because they weren't as strong. But, so they need to figure out what to do about that. And the fact that she can use the Force, but apparently hasn't been for a long time. And that's something that the story group needs to have figured out, and I assume they have, at least in a rough sense. But that's I would hope that that's addressed at some point in this movie, just because that's sort of the first big thing we're getting that might give an indication of that.
Yeah, I just that I think they're gonna have to address it. I mean,
yeah.
And I think the last big shot is Kylo Ren approaching Finn in the snow, kind of in a staggering, like he's walking through 2-foot deep snow drifts. He doesn't have a helmet on. His hair is kind of flowing, and
seeing him without the helmet was really interesting.
Yeah, so kind of like at first I thought he looked like he'd been injured, but then I realized he's kind of tromping through the snow like when you try to go up a hill and it's a snow drift and you kind of end up losing your balance. And Finn obviously looks very stressed about this because he's like, I got this lightsaber and I don't quite know what to do with it, but I think you gotta hold it like this and swing at somebody. And it kind of ends with that, I guess. And then the big title, which people were all thinking like there was going to be a new font or something, which did not come to pass. And then I think it's a little weird. They did that like let it in kind of thing where it's just like it's kind of like this weird kind of innocuous idea where it's like they're hinging a lot of this on the idea that the audience will understand the concept of the Force as it exists in the Star Wars movies, where it's like you're making the viewer do a little extra heavy lifting on this. It's like, what do they mean by letting the Force in? What?
Right.
You almost think that it was like there's like this idea that's like, well, why? Oh, they're not going to use the awakening concept again, like Snoke said. You know, I don't know. It's
right.
I feel like I'm speculating myself into oblivion at this point.
Well, and Finn, you know, when Kylo Ren comes up to him, you know, Finn, at least, he doesn't look particularly confident. You know, and I think that's because he's not necessarily Force sensitive, and he just has a lightsaber, and he's like, oh, I have to use this thing, and I'm not really sure how. But even if he is, you know, Force sensitive, I'm sure he's just sort of realized these things, and he's like, oh wow, this guy is really mad, and he's trying to cut me down, and you know, I'll defend myself, but I'm not really sure the best way to do that.
Yeah, see, that's the funny thing. You see, that's why I feel like I'm being like, you can't necessarily trust these trailers, because if the first shot we see in the first teaser is there's been an awakening, and then boom, Finn's head shoots up, and then but now we're all pretty much resolved to the fact that he's probably not Force sensitive. So they're lying to us. You know what I mean? They're telegraphing us one. They're telegraphing us one thing and giving us another. And I mean, I'm not mad at that. I'm just saying it's like, after all this speculation on our part, it's like you can't, until the movie comes out, it's just like it is. We are just shooting in the dark.
Yeah.
So we've been going.
So that'll. We've been going for a while. I do want to talk about the music.
Okay, so we'll do the music.
Before we wrap up real quick. So now, rewind back to the beginning of the trailer.
Okay.
So it opens with these kind of piano plinks that are similar to that behind-the-scenes footage. It's not quite the same, because in this case, you have these kind of strings underneath creating tension, whereas in the behind the scenes thing, there was like either a keyboard or some kind of mallet instrument, like a vibraphone or something. But the piano bits sound very similar. Like they're in the same register of the piano, and they're kind of doing similar things. I don't love this kind of musical gesture a lot, because it's just used so much, and you hear it so many places. It doesn't feel very distinctive to me, but. What did you think about the use of the music in the beginning to sort of set the tone?
Well, I kind of liked that it destabilized me a little bit. Because you always expect that dum dum da da dum kind of thing, like, oh yeah, it's hitting me in all my right spots, and then it's like, wait a second, this is, and it's like their way of saying like, all right, nerd, don't come into this thinking you know exactly how it's going to go down, because we've got some surprises for you. You know, it doesn't completely all of a sudden. It's not like all of a sudden they threw in like, you know, Jock Jams 15 or something in the middle of the action sequence to like make you go, you know, this ain't your dad's Star Wars. No, it's you know, I mean, people were going batshit on other podcasts. I keep mentioning other podcasts, but I listened to it last night because they were so mad. They call it like the Hans Zimmering of Hollywood soundtracks, because it's just basically everything is.
I don't even think you can trace it to Zimmer. I feel like that's been around for a long time.
Right. It's very sparse, and it's interesting. It makes you wonder if maybe this was composed for the trailer, or John Williams is taking, you know, one of the stipulations of him coming back to Star Wars was like, hey, I want to try something different. I've been doing some minimal stuff. I want to evoke the themes. I want to change the registers of some of our things. I want to keep it, you know, kind of a crystally, high end kind of thing to it, you know, with I want to work with ambience. I want to, you know, that thing. Okay. You know, and it's like, you'll still get your Star Wars themes, but they're just going to be a little bit different, which, you know, for a guy who's kind of at the twilight of his career, that feels like that's the kind of stuff that you have to go towards to keep it interesting, to make it worth his while to come back for a seventh time.
Right. Yeah, and I want to talk about the key of the music a little bit, because I mean, and this is very in the weeds, but so the notes that the pianos play that kind of plink out, you have B, A, C, B, B, C, A, and then either A flat or G sharp, depending on how you want to classify that. And then underneath the strings are playing basically E all the way through, and then at the very end there's a harp that does E, G, B, and so it seems like it might be either in the key of E or B, but I wonder I would guess that it's A minor, and particularly the A harmonic minor, which just means that there are no sharps and no flats except there's a G sharp. So it's, if you look at a piano keyboard and you start at middle C, and there are no sharps, no flats, so you just play all of the white keys up to the next C. Basically, if you just shift over and you start at the note A, so 2 notes down from C, and you just go from A to A with all the white keys, that's A minor. And then if you just hit A flat at the end right before you hit A, that's A harmonic minor. And the reason I think that's the key is because it's usually considered one of like the saddest keys, right? It evokes all this kind of sort of sorrow and sort of deeply felt sadness. The Grieg piano concerto, the dun 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 dun. So that's in A minor. The Beethoven piano piece for Elise, which is
like that.
Yeah, that's in A minor. The Beethoven String Quartet number 15 is in A minor, and those later Beethoven string quartets are considered very sort of emotional and heavy. And so the Sibelius Symphony number 4 is in A minor, and that was written sort of as Europe was on the brink of war, and Sibelius was just recovering from cancer. Mozart's 8th Piano Sonata was written in that key, and that was written after his mother just died. And several of the Schubert piano sonatas were written in this key, including one where he was, recovering from a serious illness. And so I think identifying it as an A minor makes more sense to me in terms of trying to evoke, I think what the tone of the movie is going to be, that, you still have this fighting between the resistance and the First Order, and now the First Order have this mega weapon, and the future of the galaxy is at stake, and perpetually kind of in this state of conflict. And especially if you get a scene like with Rey sobbing as much as she is in that scene, like tying it into that sadness and that idea that it would be A minor makes sense to me. Then when we see Kylo Ren, we get 3 notes. It's E. The notes are E, G, B, which is an E minor chord. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's not E, G, B. It's G sharp, A, and A flat, I think, or E, A, and G sharp. And so, but it's rhythmically, it's the start of the Imperial March, right? It's dun, 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 which, those 3 notes in that kind of rhythm, even though it's just 3 quarter notes, or essentially, that's essentially like the start of the Beethoven's 5th Symphony, right? We're like, da, 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 right? Like, you just know it just hearing those first couple of notes, like, what that is rhythmically, and it keys in what it is. And so you have those 3 notes, and then it shifts up or it plays the first note 3 times, and then it moves to another note, and so on. And it also evokes the second movement of Dvorak's New World Symphony, the way that movement starts, which I think that was probably the inspiration, because in some ways, because Williams has used that New World Symphony both in Star Wars for the throne room scene from A New Hope. Like, it sounds very similar to part of the New World Symphony. And then also the Jaws theme, just that, what you think of the music you think of when you think of Jaws, basically comes from Dvorak's New World Symphony, and so
that's so funny. It's so funny you say that, because I'm sorry if I'm interrupting.
No, go ahead.
So
no, I don't mean to like just monopolize.
Well, I don't know. So I've been playing guitar for 25 years. I still don't know all the notes on the neck. Mm-hmm. I can't just go there. I'm terrible. But the New World Symphony was literally, we used to have, I don't even know if we still have, a great classical radio station here in Seattle, and they were playing that piece, and I was like, I love it.
It's a very popular piece.
I love it. And I was like, it reminds me of Star Wars. And I put it on a piece of paper, and this is back before music was, instantaneous now. It was like you had to go to Tower Records and ask some snooty butthole about, like, what is this? And they would thumb their nose at you. I think I had a piece of paper with the Dvorak's New World Symphony, and it was like somebody's specific recording in 74 or something that I liked. And I could never find it. And I forgot all about it. I eventually just ended up forgetting about it. It just, you just reminded me of it. It's like I haven't thought about that in 20 years. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Yep. So, he's going back to some of the same inspirations. And then from there, after Kylo Ren, it goes right into, so visually, that's when it cuts to sort of the Falcon being chased by TIE fighters. And it goes right into Han and Leia's theme from the original trilogy. The track on the Empire Strikes Back Special Edition soundtrack is called Han Solo and the Princess, but it's sort of known colloquially as Han. Right.
And that,
and the way it's orchestrated sounds, because it shows up several times in Empire Strikes Back, and then once or twice in Return of the Jedi. The orchestration of it here in the trailer, and I assume from the movie where it's used, sounds really a lot more similar to me to the end of The Empire Strikes Back, when you have Luke and Leia on the medical frigate sort of looking out at that spiral galaxy.
Yeah.
That kind of like very romantic, like yearning quality. I think it's the key it's in, but it's also the orchestration. And here we've moved out of the A minor key for some of this other stuff. But what's interesting too about the orchestration is then when it goes up, when the notes go up, it's the note is an F natural, but when it goes up, you get this kind of woman's choir that joins in, which has not been used in the original trilogy, at least not for Han and Leia's theme. You got some women's choir for when they showed up at Cloud City,
right?
And I think maybe one other time, and then of course you had the big chorus for the prequels.
Well, then you also had
so this is kind of a.
Hello?
What's up?
Oh, I thought you cut out. I thought you cut out there. No, I was just going to say there's a male. Yeah. Well, there's a male choir for the Emperor in Jedi, right? Every time he comes on, it's like that. You were just talking female choirs, though. Sorry.
Well, I guess I mentioned the prequels. You're right. I forget about the Emperor sometimes. The interesting, so you have a slightly different orchestration there, and then I think rhythmically it's also a little different as well. Some of the notes last for a slightly longer period of time. Some of the notes are slightly shorter than they were in the original trilogy orchestration, and then after that we get the Force theme again. I say again, as we got in the teasers, I guess. Again, the rhythm is a little different. Some of the notes are shorter. It's a little quicker. There's a little more syncopation in there. And then again, there's a female choir backing it up. Plus, you get some drums similar to what we got in the prequels. And I'm thinking mostly of Episode 3 with, the battle at the very beginning, and then a few other places. And so you have this interesting sort of mix of taking some of the themes from the original trilogy, and then either resolving them in a different way or just orchestrating them a little bit different so that they evoke that basically that they combine sort of the original trilogy and the prequels in how Williams is scoring this movie, which could be interesting. I mean, if I don't envision there being a lot of prequel material in these, but some of this. some of those tricks, some of the orchestration, some of the way it's scored, a few little gestures here and there that sort of at least keep the prequels in it. I think are
yeah, it's like, well, he's probably got
sort of what we could expect.
Yeah, it's like, well, he's probably got some leftover tidbits from the composition of those, like the modalities and because we all know that there's been all this chopped up. The soundtracks got chopped up for the prequels, and so maybe he had some ideas that it's like, hey, I'd like to take another run at this idea that got deleted. And maybe I can kind of rework it for this new movie, not in like a negative, like, oh, let's just reuse the same score, but just the idea. Well, I had to evoke this emotion, but I didn't get a chance to. He just made me do the Imperial March again or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there was an interesting article that. It was like Long Island, New York's local public radio affiliate they had on their website. And it was an interview, or it wasn't really an interview. It was sort of about this composer named Thomas Newman, who did the score for Spielberg's new movie, Bridge of Spies or Bridge of Lies? I can't remember.
I don't know.
But it was basically, okay, Spielberg has worked with John Williams for almost 30 movies now, but when he can't get John Williams, when John Williams can't do it, who does he turn to? And it's this guy Thomas Newman, who is the son of Alfred Newman, former head of the music at 20th Century Fox, and who John Williams knew well. And so they interviewed John Williams for this piece, and it was interesting to sort of, because this is something that I've been thinking about a lot anyway, but. Well, I don't know if I would say a lot. This is something that I've been thinking about anyway. But, there will be a point where, John Williams can't do Star Wars movies anymore. And we've already seen Alexander Desplat, he's doing Rogue One. So who's going to score these movies if not Williams? And is it going to be up to each individual director to bring in whomever they want? Because, for Rogue One, the director, Gareth Edwards, had worked with Alexander Desplat on Godzilla. So did he get to say, okay, I want to bring in, my guy, or Kathleen Kennedy or someone else at Lucasfilm try to establish a kind of like in-house option and an in-house sound? Because then that also raises questions of like, okay, well, what should a Star Wars movie score sound like? And how do you balance keeping sort of the tradition of the way John Williams has been doing it with finding sort of new themes, new sounds, new ways of orchestrating these things. And, so far that decision has been essentially John Williams' to make. And now that decision is in others' hands. It's up to other people. And so it's that I think could be a big adjustment. And so it'll be sort of interesting to see how that's managed from here on out. Because you can make the analogy to directors where, Lucasfilm is clearly hiring just directors who, might have some of their own individual views on these things, especially for the anthology movies. But for the most part, right, okay, we're giving you the story and, we want you to make this movie for us. Rather than like, oh, well, we want to make the movie that you want to make. They're like, all right, we have a movie in mind and we want to just find someone who can film it for us. And so, whether they make that a similar kind of choice with scoring these movies, will be something that we haven't heard a lot about, but I would wager that we will at some point in the near future hear more about that.
Agreed. Boy,
right. I think that's a good place to stop.
I think that's a good place to go. I mean, I was like, we could go on about our individual travails in securing tickets.
But we both ended up with tickets.
We both ended up with tickets. I will just say it was not the theater my first choice, but one of the byproducts of picking something kind of the first one I could get a ticket at is that the first time I'm going to be seeing the movie, which I've bought tickets. I'm going Friday at 6:30. And then I'm going, and this is in the evening, and then I will be going again on Sunday at 4:00 with my in-laws. So the first time it's going to be just me and the wife, and we're going to go see it in 2D. Because that was kind of important to me, just to see, not to have any kind of distractions of IMAX, 3D, ships flying up my nose kind of stuff. And I thought, well, my brother-in-law, he's like, whatever, if you got, if you can have the, D-box and the things and the IMAX, I want it all. So I got tickets to go see it with my father-in-law and my brother-in-law. We're gonna go and see it in like 3D IMAX. So I don't know. I mean, we're 8.
Yeah, I have 8 ticket to see it in 2D. Now the current plan is that I will actually be out of town. I will be leaving the country even on December 17th and returning on the 26th. So we have tickets to see it on the 27th. Not long after we get back.
Okay, so you're not going to see it for like weeks?
But yeah, that's probable. I mean, that's horrible. Now I also won't even be in the U.S., so it's not like I'll be exposed to all of the. Are you gonna be
in Belgium?
I may be in Belgium.
Where does it? So it would be en France.
We have not bought our tickets yet, so. But
wow. Yeah. I was just gonna say we only have 8 more. We only have 8 more episodes, not including this one before the release. But that's barring people's holiday travels. So that's an interesting development, and I'm gonna leave that at a cliffhanger. You guys are all gonna go, will John actually see the movie that he's been podcasting about for the last 6 months?
I'll see it. I just won't be seeing it opening day.
Exactly.
But I will be seeing it.
Wow. That's the big reveal big reveal for the show. So good
night, everybody.
For Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
And I remain John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening.